Okay, we'll call the meeting back to order. Next up on our agenda, we have a marijuana discussion with Shane and company. Go ahead,
Ready?
Shane.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Chairwoman Fayant and members of the council. Today, we're going to just this is like our jumping off point from the last discussion we had. And what we want to start out discussing today is we provided you all with a marijuana summary, and it just has about a page and a half for both CSKT, Montana, and then the federal status. And it gives you a little bit of history, and then where we're at now on the reservation in Montana and with the United States. And so we're not going to go read this to you verbatim, but we have this here just as a resource for you all to look at. It doesn't go into depth on every single thing, of course, because we don't want to overload you with information, but we're always glad to answer questions and do follow-up with all of you. Today, we're going to start out, only fitting, I think, for us to start out discussing the status of the law on the Flathead Reservation, and then we'll go into Montana, and I'll talk a little bit about Montana, and then Jordan will talk about the federal government, what the status is there, and we'll just give you guys a quick summary of those. And then we brought over stakeholders who work in the prosecutor's office, law and order, and then Ann Miller will be online joining us today. And we brought them in to just give you all, we want to treat this as an informational session. No real action to be taken today, but we want to give you information about what the status is of marijuana, both on reservation, off reservation in Montana, and with the federal government. And then hopefully continue to flush out this issue so we can start potentially making decisions on how to proceed in the future. And the first place we thought would be a good point to start is to have the discussion on decriminalization and how that looks in Montana and how that might look on the Flathead Reservation. So with that, I guess I could just have everybody. Well, I don't think we need to do introductions. I think you guys know everybody. So with that, we'll have Mike jump into giving you a summary on the CSKT.
Good afternoon, Council. So you'll see in the outline we provided that we touched on just a little bit of the limited history we have with marijuana, and our first real legal concern with marijuana was medical marijuana back 2010. Obviously, we didn't adopt that, and that continues to not be allowed for use as an exception to a criminal law here. So one thing to point out right away is CSKT codes, CSKT laws codified section 2-1-103 is the section that references in Montana law. So it says any conduct that constitutes an offense either has to be in this code or we got to specifically reference it in by Montana law. To me, that causes a few problems, especially in our possession related CSKT code, which is 2-1100401. That is, what was that one? Drug violations. So that's your typical misdemeanor possession statute that we would use to enforce a violation. Though in parts 2 and 3 in that section, you've got specific reference to misdemeanors. And with the changes from HB 701, we don't comply with the incorporation with Title 45, Chapter 9 of Montana law because they're not dealing in misdemeanors anymore. So we have to do an update there. An update's coming whether or not we do any decriminalization, just so you know. We've already identified that issue in the code revision group. But if we are going to get this clear for any potential decriminalization, we'll definitely have to update that to incorporate that possibility. Another one to look at is 2-1-1402, which would be your Paraphernalia Statute. Now, this statute is intentionally vague. It does not specifically mention marijuana. It does reference to the MCA again, and there's the, if you go through the MCA, you can find the linking statutes that kind of put together the 1402 and the definitions, the scheduling, all the things that you would need to fill that statute in. My read on that is if we did decriminalize, we might want to update that to specifically mention marijuana in the statute that if we legal here. Otherwise, it does seem to be a still functioning statute. We have some other youth code issues that we have to resolve if there is a change in the law. Jim Taylor does mention in his outline status offenses. I'd actually not address that in my outline. I addressed serious crimes and youth offenses. And we would need an update in serious crime definition because that's got a Class D requirement and a requirement involving a dangerous drug. So that's incompatible because the Class D, again, is a misdemeanor statute. Or misdemeanor offense, misdemeanor maximum penalty, sorry. And then youth offense definition, I think we're pretty good there. Maybe just a review to make sure any changes don't impact that part. So basically anything that we do with decriminalization is gonna require us to take a look at these laws to make sure that we're consistent with enforcement, and really we have to make sure the youth codes are still in place to prohibit and penalize marijuana use by juveniles. Another thing to consider real quick, and as a last thought, is there are some exceptions that are in the MCA and in the House Bill 701 that are for cardholders for medical marijuana. And that's another area where we'll have to dig in and figure out how that applies. An example is in HB 701, a person under 18 who is a registered medical marijuana cardholder is not subject to the civil fine or forfeiture or any of the education classes for paraphernalia under the state law. So I don't know what we would do with that, but that's just something to consider.
Thank you, Chairwoman and council members. Any questions for Mike before we move to the Montana portion? None?
Looks like we're good.
Okay. And so just as a side note, I did put in there document as confidential privilege, just as that's just as a matter of habit that I put that in there. But I think this is all information that is publicly available. So it's fine to share and use as the council would like. We think it's not ultra comprehensive, but it like I said earlier, it's just really to try and hit a summary of giving you guys a little information about where we are in each of these jurisdictions. Within this document, there's also we did insert links, hyperlinks for a lot of things and resources, so you guys can click on those if you're curious on reading those. And then we did throw in some of those CSKT laws codified that Mike just mentioned. We didn't want to just throw those into the document and bore you guys to death with all of those citations. So those are in the document for you guys to read. And if you have follow-up, just again, let us know. I'm going to talk about Montana and where we're at with the Montana law. As you all know, we just this past session, Montana passed House Bill 701. But before that, Montana passed a ballot initiative, which included a lot of different provisions. And to be honest, I don't think, I mean, the legislation is pretty long. And so, you know, a lot of people probably don't memorize everything that's within that ballot initiative, but it did create have a lot of comprehensive information in there and changes to Montana statutes and structuring processes for regulating marijuana, recreational marijuana in Montana. And I'll get to that in just a second. But under this particular document, just in the beginning, Montana actually made marijuana legal back in 1929. So before that, it was essentially the Wild West. But in 1929, after a health committee meeting in Montana, it was made illegal, and it was stayed in that status until 2004, when Montana passed a medical marijuana initiative under I-148, and you can see I hyperlinked that there. And in between 2004 and today, we essentially had a lot of different pieces of legislation and legal fights and wranglings over medical marijuana in Montana. And I've included that information in here for you if you're more curious about kind of reading up on that. I think I myself was a bit confused during the medical marijuana phases in Montana with Supreme Court decisions and limitations on patient numbers and that sort of thing. And so it got pretty confusing for people in the state of Montana. And I try to do my best to just kind of summarize that with the different pieces of legislation that came through and may have changed or tweaked things and then reverted things back to where they were. And so essentially after where we landed in Montana, after 2016, as things were pretty much put back into place after there were some changes made by various legislators, and I-182 essentially restored things to the status of where we were back in 2004, but also included some new provisions for medical marijuana providers to have, to be able to see more than one provider, and also it allowed those dispensaries to not be capped at 3 people, which is what the Supreme Court case law had done in between. Well, as you all know, in 2020, last year, there was a ballot initiative put on the ballot in Montana to legalize marijuana and amend the Constitution for adults 21 and older to possess or purchase marijuana. Those both initiatives were CI 118 and I 190. Those were both on the ballot, and both of those passed in Montana. Notably, I 190 set out the parameters for 21 plus year olds for possession, obtaining, using, ingesting, inhaling, transporting, delivering, or distributing marijuana in Montana. And that was set at 1 ounce of marijuana, except that no more than 8 grams could be in a concentrated form. So that's what happened in I-190. People, I think, got a little confused with the legislative session. So essentially when I-190 was passed, that was the law in Montana. That went into effect. If you look at Montana code, they updated the statutes to reflect I-190 and C-118 or CI-118. Then we go into the legislature, which then revisited and was a little more comprehensive and actually made some tweaks to some of the things that were changed, because I don't think some things were as definitive and as comprehensive as they probably should have been when they came out of I-190 more specifically. So the other thing I would mention under I-190 that was recently passed is that it obviously set up testing and licensing processes. That was also dealt with in House Bill 701. And then also the initiative set out, and this is relevant to what Mike just talked about. It had decriminalization for several criminal statutes under Title 45. So it talked about criminal possession, criminal production and manufacturing, criminal distribution, and paraphernalia laws. So the misdemeanors in those statutes were changed or struck out completely. So that ties in directly to the issue that Mike just mentioned and that Jim will discuss with you guys, and Ann and Louie as well here in just a few minutes. So at this point in time, the legislation also set out, the ballot initiative also had like limitations for home grow, which was 4 plants. That was changed in House Bill 701 to 2 plants and two seedlings, so you can have 2 mature plants under the Montana law. And the law in Montana goes into effect from House Bill 701, goes into effect starting January 1 of 2022. So that whole regulatory landscape and the ability for businesses to sell in Montana is going to happen starting in January. There's a moratorium starting January 1, 2022, which allows medical marijuana providers to really have the first shot at the industry for 1.5 years. After that 1.5 years, other business owners will have the ability to enter into into the recreational industry in Montana. And that was done because in Montana, medical marijuana providers were basically doing all of that, right? There were the dispensaries, there were the grows, they had the canopy grow structures and all of that kind of stuff. And so they were already established. And so the legislature felt that, in all fairness to them, that they would grandfather them and let them have the first shot at the industry in Montana. One other thing the legislation did in Montana was it created an opt-in situation. So counties that didn't vote for recreational marijuana actually have to opt in to be able to allow businesses to sell in the state of Montana. Counties that are already, that passed the initiative, such as Lake County, is already included and able to sell under the legislation. And I think there's some other information in that section about, civil penalties for 18-year-olds and people under 21 for different limitations if people sell over the 1 ounce or give people marijuana products over the 1 ounce. There's certain civil penalties, and then there's civil penalties for individuals under the age of 21 and 18 as well. And then obviously the one thing that was in the 590 was it made sure that it's not legal to drive and use medical or use marijuana products. So that's just kind of a quick and dirty overview of House Bill 701. I think I mentioned this to the council before, but the legislation in House Bill 701 did create a combined use license for tribes in Montana under the Montana legislation for utilizing a license within 150 miles of the reservation. And for Little Shell, there was specific language because they don't have a reservation. And then there's up to $500,000 in grant monies for healing and addiction under the legislation. And then there was a creation of the Heart Fund, which will also have a bunch of money and programs set up for treatment and addiction as well. So that, I guess, gives you an update on where we're at in Montana. There is a expungement process within the Montana legislation that was set up as well.
So I have some questions, Shane. On the current dispensaries, how were those operating at the January 22?
So medical marijuana is still regulated just as it always was. And in fact, the medical marijuana providers can still sell to cardholders, and they can sell to them at there's a 4% tax rate, which has been in place since, I think, 2019. So those dispensaries still have the option to sell to those those individuals with a medical card. What we have seen in some states across the country is medical marijuana typically starts to phase out, although that's not the intent of anybody. But people who obtain or get those medical cards, it costs money. And so they typically transition into purchasing recreational because it's less process and they can spend their money directly on recreational, although the tax rate in Montana will be set at 20% for recreational.
Okay, my second question is, so how did the counties get involved? Was that part of the legislation that they could opt in or approve?
Yeah, so the original I-190 basically legalized it throughout the state of Montana. So that was the status of the law once I-190 passed. The legislature, hearing from people from those counties and legislators from those counties where they actually didn't approve it, said, well, we don't necessarily want it being sold here. That doesn't mean that it's illegal to transport it through the area or have it there. Just as far as like businesses and selling it, some of them didn't want it there. So the legislature said, fine, we hear you. So we'll structure the legislation to where you have to vote to pass it in those counties where it didn't pass in order to have those businesses set up to sell.
Okay, and then my last question is, the $500,000 in grants, is that the total number?
Chairwoman Fine, that's the total number, yes. And I will just say really quick that I think there's a lot of uncertainties as to how much revenue is going to be created with recreational Montana. And so that is to be determined still. I think we've tried to model that and determine what that looks like in Montana. And I think there's different opinions on what that's going to look like now and in the future for revenue. And so obviously a lot of these things can be, as we see what revenues are in the future, things might be tweaked as we move along.
Okay, Carol?
Yeah, I'm just curious if you have any information on the 4% tax that was assessed, how much you've raised to this point, or how much the state's raised to this point?
Chairwoman Fayant, Councilwoman Langford, I don't know what the numbers are for revenue based off of the 4% for medical. I know that data likely exists, so we can try and find that information. I know a lot of that revenue, at least when the tax was first instituted under Senator Cafaro, was set at 4% and then it went to 2%. But a lot of that goes into like testing and then licensing. The testing process is, they test a lot for pesticides and those sorts of things. So a lot of that money is put into making sure that the products are clean, quality products in Montana.
Madam Chair, what I've seen in other legislation like the gambling, they had money set aside, it seemed like, for the addiction part, and then all of a sudden there's no money for addiction, nothing for treatment. So I hope whatever they do, that stays in there.
Any other questions? Ellie?
Madam Chair, just a quick search shows that Montana took in 1.8 million in medical marijuana taxes over the first 13 months of collections.
And Chairwoman Fine, it looks like we received one question about what other Montana tribes might be doing. The only one that I've heard, and I think it's just because it's been in the media, is the Crow tribe. They're looking at entering the recreational industry. They've signaled that a couple of times. I don't know what they plan on doing or what kind of conversations they're having with the feds, or if they propose any certain taxing percentages or any of those sorts of things. I'm sure they do, but I haven't seen any of that information made available, nor have I seen any, structured regulatory framework in any sort of like ordinance or anything from the Crow tribe yet.
And we asked for that information during the STID Commission meeting last week. So they're going to follow up with that for those people that were at the STID Commission.
And Madam Chair, to add to that, have spoken to, I think we've informed you this a few times, spoken to attorneys that work with tribes that do recreational marijuana out of state. Their advice, and I think it's relevant to this, is has always been wait for your state to get a system. We talked to a group of attorneys that was actually representing a Montana tribe. So that seems to be the consistent advice in the industry. My assumption would be that these other tribes are waiting and they're just starting out like us, similar timeframes. So it's likely they don't have anything yet to share either.
And Chairwoman Fient, I think the Blackfeet tribe had decriminalized medical marijuana, I think in 2018. And I think their decriminalization ordinance or resolution wasn't signed off by the BIA, but they are a bit different. So as you all know, we're not all the same, and they obviously have BIA police there, law enforcement. We have a little bit different structure, and we obviously have our statutes that we passed. 103A was approved by the BIA, which does incorporate Chapter 9, Title 45 of Montana Code Annotated, which were some of those crimes that we mentioned above that were changed as far as the misdemeanors for certain marijuana offenses. So we're intertwined with that, and then we also have PL 280 here. So, and I know that we're contracted, I believe, with, or compacted with law and order. And Louis can probably touch on that too if we need. So that, just wanted to bring that up because I think those are some of the bigger takeaways from the section that Mike talked about earlier. And if it's okay, we'll just move through the federal portion and just see if Jordan can keep that one nice and tight, because I do want to make sure that the stakeholders that you all are hearing from them and what they foresee the landscape looking like with legalization in Montana and what it looks like right now, and anything they would like to share with you. So I do want to make sure that they have plenty of time to do that. So if Jordan is there, we can ask him to jump on here.
All right, keep it short, huh, Shane? I can do that.
Shorter than me, for sure.
Good afternoon, Tribal Council and everyone who's there. So in your memo, it just includes for the federal section, sort of a brief history there. In the early 20th century, like a mini drugs, seems like it was pretty readily available. Not many people smoked it. And then I think it was Mexicans came in and taught folks how to smoke it. And at that point in time, the United States started taking a harder look at it. After the Prohibition era, they started looking at other things like opiates, cocaine, and marijuana. Congress first regulated it in 1937. Then in 1952, they provided for mandatory sentences. And then in the 1970s, they passed the Controlled Substance Act, which labeled marijuana as a Schedule I drug, the most dangerous of drugs, which has no medical value, making it difficult to even study for research purposes. So cannabis remains a Schedule I drug under federal law today. However, federal guidance has loosened in recent years. So that's the main point of this section. So as many states are deciding to decriminalize marijuana, the federal government's provided guidance, creating some space for this through a series of memos. So President Obama's administration issued a series of memos. And the first one that we're looking at in this memo in 2010, the Holder memo, then Attorney General Holder stated, among other things, that persons who commit similar crimes should be treated similarly, and that prosecutors should take into account the needs of the communities they serve, as well as federal priorities and resources. So that one's important because we're going to come back to that one. Then in August of 2013, there was another memo released by the AG, and it stated that federal resources would not be used to prosecute marijuana-related crimes in states that have legalized marijuana, so long as 8 priority enforcement areas were met. And this is just to try to keep the area safe. So you have preventing distribution to minors, preventing revenues from going to criminal enterprises, preventing the diversion of marijuana from states where it is legal to states in which it is not legal, preventing marijuana activity from being used as a cover for trafficking of other illegal drugs, preventing violence in the distribution of marijuana, preventing drugged driving and other adverse public health consequences associated with marijuana use, preventing the growing of marijuana production on public lands, and preventing marijuana possession or use on federal property. So as long as states were covering those areas and providing safety mechanisms to limit those things, the federal government decided it was not going to prosecute those crimes. And then in a 2014 Department of Justice memo, Obama's administration that stated that federal law enforcement in Indian country related to marijuana would align with those same 8 priorities. In 2017, under the Trump administration, Attorney General Jeff Sessions issued a memo rescinding the Obama era guidance, it appeared like. And just recently now, acting U.S. District, or I'm sorry, the acting AG issued another memo rescinding the Trump memo, saying that the 2010 Holder memo is still in place. It was uncertain if the 8 kind of priorities to limit are still in play, but the memo did say that they're going to be looking to further clarify the issue once permanent appointees are made. So right now it looks like the only clear guidance we have is that the feds can't discriminate on prosecution. And so in my mind, there might be some differences between states and tribes with contracts, but it seems like there's room to say that you can't prosecute tribes and not states at the same time, providing some protection for tribes, especially if we kind of keep in mind those 8 different areas. In a recent interview, acting U.S. Attorney for Montana, Leif Johnson, said that generally the production, distribution, possession, and use of marijuana remains unlawful under federal law. However, pursuant to policy from the United States Department of Justice, the United States Attorney's Office retains the discretion to prosecute such a violation of federal law. And there's other federal acts in play. Just recently, the House passed the Safe Banking Act in April, which would allow banks to provide services to legitimate marijuana businesses, including tribes, which moves it from a cash-only business to something that's a little bit more legitimate. And that legislation is co-sponsored by Senator Daines. So just to let you guys know that there does seem to be some movement in the arena of legalization, or at least non-prosecution at the federal level. So I think that's about as short as I can make mine, Shane.
That was perfect, Jordan. I actually think you hit on everything that we needed to on that front. So is there, what questions do you all have for Jordan or any of us, I guess?
So does the Safe Banking Act, does that take out that, all those suspicious, whatever that terminology is about that kind of money? All those regulations?
Jordan, do you want to take a stab at that?
Chairwoman Fiant, so it still has to go through the Senate. And so because it's sponsored by Daines and appears to have some support by Democrats, I'm assuming that's going to pass. So we could look more into that. But yeah, I think that would certainly help with the legitimizing of the business and moving that away from cartels and that sort of thing. That would be my initial take.
Any other questions? Okay.
All right, well, I want to, be mindful of the folks that took time out of their day to come over here and chat with you all. So I guess we could start with, I guess a good place to start would be with law and order. We could start there. And let them kind of share their perspective on, obviously they've been tracking this and are aware of what's going on in Montana, and kind of where their focuses have been, and where they plan to be, and just any other comments that you guys might have that you think council might want to just have on the radar and be aware of. So I'll hand it off to Captain Fiddler.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I kind of took this as an opportunity to reach out to everybody that I could in the department, get their feelings on this issue. And first and foremost, obviously, we're here to enforce the law, no matter what the decision is. And that's pretty much on everybody's mind every day, obviously. The one thing that was pretty much out of everybody's mouth first was the unfair treatment of tribal members. We've done several traffic stops, several contacts on the street where a tribal member is standing next to a non-member. Both of them possess marijuana, whether it's a small amount or a large amount, and the tribal member goes to jail. None of us are in favor of that. But that's, again, that's not the entirety of the situation. Our guys will have to increase some training in drug recognition and to recognize impairment levels, which would be an increase in our budget, across the board for everybody, all the patrol staff anyhow. Some of the guys, myself included, kind of look at this as losing ground in some sort of respect, just because other jurisdictions that we have friends in that work in those jurisdictions where legalization of marijuana was first, now it's to the point where the street patrol guys are making contacts with folks with what they deem personal use amounts of methamphetamine and heroin, and they're not being arrested or even cited. And some of the guys, like I said, myself included, feel like this is kind of a step in the wrong direction in that respect. The law is the law, and it's still drugs in our eyes. And we don't want to lose any teeth out there with, you know, the limitations that we already have. Some people suggest that it's going to free up some of our time, our resources. If there are more people using it, it's going to create more people out there that are using it. They're going to be on our streets. They're going to be committing crimes. They're going to be maybe there's a possibility of increased, you know, traffic violations, traffic accidents, accidents related to the use of marijuana. Not that we don't have them now, but, you know, legalization, obviously there's going to be an influx in those sorts of things, which is a concern for our guys. The use of marijuana in teens and young adults, we see the probability of an increase, which obviously is a concern. And in correlation with that is the lack of treatment that we have for drug addicted folks on a reservation currently. Marijuana is addictive, just like alcohol, just like methamphetamine, just like cigarettes. And our people are going to need treatment if we find ourselves in that place. We're not going to have a whole lot of options in that respect. Just some of the opinions, like I said, that I wanted to share with you guys from the guys that I got a chance to speak to, Vern and Brian, and the other task force member, Chief Couture. Don't have a whole lot other than that. If you guys have any questions for me.
Okay, Fred?
Is anybody gonna talk about or address the consequences of, folks who, for employment purposes? I think there's unfairness there too. So is anybody addressed that or done the research? I see a lot of the, back in the day, firefighters and wood workers, and seems like we're getting less and less because they can't pass a marijuana test, basically. They call it a drug test, but it's, using a little marijuana off the job, or not necessarily on the job, but, anyway.
No, Chairwoman Fayant, Councilman Matt, that is on our radar. It's in another piece of what we plan to bring to you all. Today, we kind of just focus a little bit more on the looking at kind of just the general status, and then the criminalization aspect and what that looks like in Montana. So, but we do have that on our radar, and that was something that was also included in the state legislation. Well, they had a separate statute addressing that particular issue for people who test positive for marijuana in the state of Montana. So that's something we'd obviously want to address, especially under 69D and our employment practices, personnel practices here. Regardless of what we do, we know that we're going to see more marijuana here and in the state of Montana, obviously with legalization. So, we're going to have to, a lot of these things they're going to be here whether we want to address them or not, really. So.
Go ahead, Len.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the council. So has the federal government been looking at reclassifying this drug? Because isn't marijuana a Schedule 1 or a Schedule 3 or what are they, Schedule 1? But are they, if that process ever takes place, this decriminalization, it would make everything just a lot easier for us. Is that correct?
Chairwoman Fayant, Councilman Two Teeth. Obviously, if the feds took some action in, on the federal laws, that would make things a lot different for everybody across the country. I have only heard that, I haven't heard anything really more than reclassifying as potentially like a Schedule 2, which would put marijuana into the category of like opioids, you know, for medical use. And it would still be a controlled substance, as Mike just mentioned. But right now, yes, it's still classified as a Schedule 1 and Schedule 1 drug, as a dangerous drug and under federal law.
Okay, and so, and that just is, heroin is in that classification too, correct?
Yep, it's a Schedule 1 as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Louis.
Thank you. And isn't there anyone, any of these guys? Okay. All right, thank you, Chairwoman Fine. We'll go to Jim, and then after Jim, we'll go to Ann Miller and have both of them chime in on and answer those same questions that we brought up earlier with Captain Fiddler.
Madam Chair, members of the council, thanks for inviting me. I prepared a bunch of questions and answers for you. I won't go through those all now, but I thought maybe that'd be a useful format for you to be able to look through and say, well, what about this? What about this? I think from my perspective, marijuana is here. You're going to have to deal with it. I think the fairness aspect that Louis brings up has some equal protection considerations about, and in the paper, I've got some examples of what happens when people are treated differently. I know Lake County is concerned about vehicle stops where it's maybe a tribal member driving, they smell marijuana, the driver's not impaired, but then somebody wants to do a search of the vehicle. Is that going to cause problems and felony prosecutions? And it may. From the work that we do, I don't think we've seen a single case where somebody was DUI just based on marijuana. They almost always have meth or heroin also in their system. I don't think I've seen a single one that was just marijuana in the last 2 years. The bigger problem that you have that needs to be addressed, whatever happens with marijuana, when the tribes adopted the criminal code back in '94 as part of retrocession, there was a provision that Shane's gone over where the tribes adopted Montana law, Title 45, Chapter 9. And the problem is the council didn't say anything about whether amendments to that code were automatically adopted by the tribe. That becomes an issue because when you look at Title 61 on traffic offenses, you did say specifically any amendments to Montana law are adopted by the tribes unless the tribes decide otherwise. So there's an automatic adoption of any changes in the traffic laws. That didn't happen with the drug laws. I'm not at all clear about whether we do or don't have those amendments. And there have been more than 20 and maybe less than 30 amendments to those laws. Virtually every part of Title 45, Chapter 9 has been adopted once. Some sections have been adopted or amended 7 or 8 times. I don't know if we've adopted those or we haven't, and that has to be clarified. Whatever else happens, if the council ultimately decides to just adopt those amendments, then that automatically decriminalizes marijuana. If you've already adopted them, if those changes have already taken place, then you already have medical marijuana. Because when medical marijuana was adopted by the state, the council came out with some public statements that says we're not adopting that, but you didn't change the statute. So if you already had the amendments to the statute, then it was already legal. So it's an area that is not in good shape that just needs to be fixed one way or the other. It wouldn't give me heartburn at all if you decide to decriminalize. I think that that's the thing to do in terms of fairness to the people and how they're treated. I think makes the most sense in terms of making enforcement of the criminal law uniform across the reservation. I don't think you're going to get any trouble with the feds because you're a PL 280 jurisdiction. If you're a PL 280 jurisdiction and you just say we've adopted Montana law, I don't think the federal government has a leg to stand on to squawk about, well, you've legalized marijuana. Well, you told us to adopt Montana law. We've adopted Montana law. So I don't think that's going to be a big issue in terms of decriminalization. I don't have any opinion on the regulatory, the taxation stuff. That's legal's department. But I do think the major issue of whether you're adopting the amendments to the drug laws needs to be addressed. And there's been an awful lot of amendments to those laws since 1994. So either we still have the law in effect in 1994 or we have the current law, but I'd like to know for sure which one it is. And I really don't want to litigate that because I don't think you're going to get a result you like.
And Chairwoman Fayant, any questions for Jim?
So how do we proceed with that, Jim?
Well, I've proposed some language. If you look on page 4, it says policy issue before the council, which is whether the tribes have adopted those amendments to Title 45, Chapter 9. And I'm proposing that when you get around to taking council action on this, that you just use the same language that you did in terms of Title 61 that says all amendments to the above mentioned provisions of the Montana Code operated or annotated shall operate to amend this code until tribal law provides otherwise. That way you can do a review every session and see, do we want these amendments? Do we not? I'm assuming that the drug guys want all the new amendments to the laws, but this clarification would need to happen.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any questions from council? No. Okay, thanks.
All right. So council members, those specific changes would be to the criminal laws on the reservation. By making those changes, just to be clear, that wouldn't be adopting the regulatory framework for licensing or like canopies or dispensaries or any of that kind of stuff. That's all separate. This is specific to the criminal offenses in Montana or on the reservation in regard to marijuana. So,
Madam Chair, members of the council, it would, however, definitely include medical marijuana. Because if you look at, it's kind of goofy the way that things are criminalized and decriminalized, but if you look at Title 45, Chapter 9, it says these things are against the law unless it says otherwise over here. And one of the over here's is medical marijuana. So if you did that, you would all, in addition to recreational marijuana, you would also be approving medical marijuana.
Thanks for that clarification.
yeah. Thanks for the clarification, Jim. So we're going to hand it off to Ann Miller, if that's okay, Chair, Councilwoman Fayant. It's all yours, Ann.
Thanks very much for letting me speak on this issue. I raise similar issues that have already been raised. First of all, caseload. We really have other more pressing matters to deal with in tribal court, and we certainly have more pressing underlying issues to deal with at the Tribal Defender's Office. There's been an explosion of mental health and substance use disorders, as council is well aware, I'm sure. And representing on marijuana charges is just, it's not related to the explosion that I am referring to. There's also a services perspective that I have from the services we're trying to provide our clients. We have a real need for co-occurring treatment for our clients related to alcohol use, methamphetamine, heroin, harder substances. And according to our addictions counselor, I, like Louis, kind of polled my staff and asked their opinion on this. According to our addictions counselor, data shows that marijuana is not a gateway drug. Really, the gateway is trauma to substance use disorders. So even if we believe that using the criminal justice system to deal with addiction issues is a good idea, marijuana is just not something we need to target at this point. I wanted to talk also about collateral consequences. What we deal with a lot at the Tribal Defender's Office are those collateral issues that fall out from criminal charges and criminal convictions. Possession of marijuana and marijuana paraphernalia is another way to create a collateral consequence for our clients who are already continually cycling through the system. A drug charge, even a misdemeanor marijuana charge or a paraphernalia charge, can lead to incarceration, either pre-trial, persons thrown in before they get in front of a judge, or because they haven't paid their fine or they haven't made a court appearance, and it just starts that cycle, which can then lead to things like child protection involvement, eviction, loss of a job. And I'm wondering why we would want to, when we have the choice, why we would add another reason to allow people to be cycling through the system. Especially when we talk about it applies only to tribal members and not non-members. And so that relates to the fairness issue. It just seems fundamentally unfair to me that non-members can legally possess an ounce of marijuana, but tribal members cannot. And also what came up among my staff is it's just one more way to contribute to the disparity of tribal members in the state justice system. We've talked about that repeatedly. You know about the disparities of tribal members in the state system. Right now, we have 375 Cskt members that are either supervised or incarcerated by the Department of Corrections. If you think of it in these terms, the decriminalization of marijuana would be a way to, well, let me put it the other way. Criminalization of marijuana for tribal members and not non-members is one way for other jurisdictions on the reservation, not the tribal police, but other jurisdictions to really target tribal members for probable cause to search, which then can lead to felony charges, which then can lead to cycling into the state justice system. And then finally, I just wanted to talk about just generally criminal justice reform. It seems to me that in the big picture, decriminalization of marijuana would be a good first step to better justice practices. If you think in terms of treating substance use disorders as a public health issue and not a criminal justice issue. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Ellie?
So I have a question. I don't know who to direct it to. So currently with Housing Authority and the zero tolerance, and I mean, people are being evicted, right, for charges there on this now. What would that look like if it's decriminalized, even though that's relying on federal funding?
The direct answer I got from Jody Perez was their board directed them to stand firm until the tribes make a decision. So they'll adjust if the tribes adjust, basically. But currently, yeah, they're still following the zero tolerance policy, and you can be evicted for not even a conviction, an allegation. So
follow up. So if it is decriminalized, can they then make that change?
good question. It kind of fits into all of that Cole memo stuff and then putting tribal resources at risk. So there's an analysis that needs to be done, and they'd probably want to get an opinion from someone in the higher levels of HUD to see if they can get some coverage on that issue, or at least a clear statement.
So Chairwoman Fine, council members, that's another piece that we have in our nice long outline of subjects we want to bring. And we do plan to bring other stakeholders in to have these similar conversations with all of you. So, I don't know if like certain grant funds would be impacted, like through NAHASDA or any of those sorts of things, if it wasn't a zero tolerance. So those are things that we would have to have discussions with those folks about and determine what that looks like moving forward. And I think some of those conversations are yet to have been had, and we're gonna have to have those conversations in the future with some of those agencies and grant programs.
Anita?
I kind of fallen behind the question of what Ellie's talking about when I think about liability as well, when you got people who could possibly go out at noon and get high and come back and drive vehicles and operate equipment and everything else. So liability is another issue that I would like to find more information on.
Chairwoman Fiant, Councilwoman Matt, you're right. I mean, these are things that right now under, our ordinance, you can't do that right now, right? So, those are policy decisions that we'll have to have, and we'll have to bring in, the personnel folks and discuss how that might look moving forward. There's also a lot of different various types of testing systems out there nowadays. So if somebody does seem to be impaired, you can test them, do rapid testing and that sort of stuff too. So those are things that we'd want to explore and look into in the future.
Okay, Martin?
All right, thank you, Madam Chair, and everyone else that's here today. A lot of great information. I expected the legal department to come well prepared, which they always are. I appreciate all the opinions out there, but I feel like this is something that we've kind of danced around for, I think one of the things was 2010 when it kind of first started coming out here. And as a tribe, I feel like we have done our members a disservice by not looking into this more thoroughly. A lot of the old ideas and the propaganda that's out there still really exists within our membership. You look at also the effect of the church and the boarding schools and that on things, and you look at our history as a tribe. Where we've come to now is something where it feels like we hide behind the fact that federal funding is so important to us and all these things, and that's been the argument. And now that the argument is gone, I feel we should move on, and I appreciate Jim's kind of showing us how we can go down this route. One of the things that kind of gets at me is that our, talk about discrimination amongst our own amongst our own reservation. If you have a medical card, you're a criminal here on the reservation. And I feel that is wrong. If you're a tribal member, the dispensaries here on the reservation exist, and they won't sell to our tribal members that have cards illegally per our laws. And I feel that's wrong as well. I feel like a lot of our members use this as a medical, for medical purposes. And really it's something that, we are using a lot of old data. And I appreciate, looking at the numbers that are really real numbers, not just the scare tactic numbers, not just, because this happened in a different state and crime spike there, it's bad, or this happened. Yes, there's gonna be negative effects to this. Everything is. There are a lot of negative effects of alcohol, and we allow that. I think that probably officers could sit out in front of a bar and pull people over as they drove away from bars and get a lot of the dangerous people off the streets. And I know that would be entrapment. I know that's illegal, and I know all that stuff. But again, it's this double standard that we have against something that has had so much government propaganda against it, that's just the normal culture of our society, and especially us as with our history. And then you get into the trauma, and that gets back into our religion. You look at the boarding schools and the disgraceful mass grave that was just found last week. That is something that is our history. A lot of people don't realize that, but my first generation survivor of a boarding school, my dad, it's not that far removed from us. So the trauma and the co-occurring problems that our people have and all the drug and alcohol issues, if we can really utilize this for good, the financial side, the other part that we talk about a lot, or, I've talked a lot about is how do we get people off opioids? Cannabis has been shown to work to get people off of opioids, meth, alcohol. I mean, I would much rather have someone that smoked weed live next to me than a drunk, a meth addict, a heroin addict, a pill addict. You go down the list of things, this is not as bad in my opinion as those things. You look at our tribal health, we have a Suboxone and a program like that helps people get off drugs by giving them another drug. Alternative medicine, I think, has come a long way. I think that the research and the science behind this has come a long way. We are a lot more educated now than we ever were, and that is who we are. We are, as a people, we adapt. We take things that are good and we use them to their best, and that's something that we need to continue to do, is evolve as a people. And it's something that we have, an opportunity here to utilize this for good. And I fully understand Louis and all the the hesitancy on your side, because it is probably gonna make your guys' lives a little bit harder at first. But hopefully, if we can heal our communities, these type of things won't be there anymore. The drug addiction and all these things, can go away. We're a few generations away from that, but it's going to take a lot of work. And this is something that we've devoted a lot of time to, and I appreciate that. And that's just kind of if you guys ever have any questions, I feel like I've kind of grown up in this and seen the changes from the the mid 90s till now of where our reservation was and where it is now, and the negative effects of different things that we've had in this area. And it's been partly because of our fault. The prescription epidemic is crazy here, and we got to start focusing on that. And this could be a step towards that. Let's take the good of this. Let's try to negate the bad as much as we can, and let's go. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Did you have something?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Fred.
Yeah, well, a couple of things Martin touched on it a little bit, but the part I think that's missing here is the health folks, because I think when you start talking about statistics, and I'm not the expert either, but I still say, and I've been saying it, that alcohol is probably the highest percentage of all deaths related, car accidents and overdose. And I mean, I think if you look into that, that's still the number one cause of the evils of addictions. When you have the health folks run those numbers as well. So, and then what Anita said, legalizing marijuana isn't going to allow you to go out at noon and smoke a joint and then come back to work. Same thing with alcohol. You don't allow your employees to go out at noon and take a couple of shots of whiskey and come back to work. I mean, there's parameters around, using that, after hours and things of that nature. I don't think you can in a workplace have your employees or prohibit them from drinking alcohol after hours. So it'd be the same thing with marijuana. So, but those two things, I think that alcohol still is the number one evil that we deal with.
So thank you for that presentation. I think one of the things that Martin touched on was the trauma, and these are just ways to medicate ourselves. So I think if we were really to get to the root of the problem, it's that trauma itself. And We had a resolution presented to us that I believe is on our schedule for next week to talk about treatment facility. And in that regard, it's treating it as a public health issue. And so I appreciate this conversation. And can you just tell us what our next could, because this was designed to be given to us in chunks. And so we talked about decriminalization today. If you could tell us what our next steps or next subject are.
Yeah, Chairwoman Fient and council members. So that's correct. We're going to kind of present. There's a lot of pieces to marijuana. You have expungement, you have decriminalization. Decriminalization and expungement kind of go hand in hand, I think. But what we plan to do is to probably just touch base with the policy folks and see, kind of get an idea of where they would like us to kind of go next with you all. That's kind of how we started this, how we had chatted with Ryan and just said, kind of how do we want to start the conversation. And I think our plan is to give this to you in bites so that you guys can think about these issues, decide whether or not you want to make any policy decisions in each area. So for example, we'll have something on personnel, we'll have something on like regulations, we'll have something on like we just talked about expungement. So there's just a whole swath of different issues connected to marijuana. So we'll try and do our best to break those down in a way where, especially as like we talked about housing, where we bring a small group in so that they can talk to you about what they forecast the impacts being for a specific subject matter area. We just wanted to keep this group kind of more on point with decriminalization discussion and just give you guys kind of an overview today of the landscape. So I guess we'll touch base with the policy folks and let you all have a conversation with them about the next steps, and we'll see where we land on the next subject matter area.
Okay, Jim?
Madam Chair, on expungement, the code revision group has been meeting and we have talked about that, and we're not recommending that when you get to expungement that you deal with it just in the context of marijuana. We think the council should consider a larger program for expungement for people to get their lives. I mean, everybody in the reservation goes through stuff in their lives, either personally or through their family. And when they get through that process and they come out the other side, we think they should be given a break. We have to decide, you have to decide the parameters of that break, how far back you want to go, what kind of factors you'd like to see before tribal convictions are expunged. But we'd like you to consider a larger program for expungement. A couple other real quick points. Montana, when they decriminalized marijuana, up to 1 ounce is legal, 1 to 2 ounces is a civil fine, above 2 ounces is still a felony. Distribution of more than 2 ounces, unless you go through the state system, is still a felony. Possession of more than 2 ounces is still a felony. So when we're talking about decriminalizing, we're talking about decriminalizing very small amounts. And then the last thing I wanted to add is I just wanted to support what Ann had said about bigger fish to fry in our criminal justice system. We've just seen a rash of cases this past year of violence, domestic violence, sexual violence, serious drug offenses. Louis can tell you, when I got here 2 years ago, maybe twice a month, we'd make a referral for a mental health eval in the jail. I don't think there's a week that goes by we don't make multiple requests now for evaluation. We have people stacked up to get evaluated who are in the jail, juveniles, adults, parents. We're facing some real serious situations, and marijuana kind of doesn't move the needle in terms of the other things we're dealing with. It really doesn't. That's all.
So with that, we will touch base with folks, but I did pull up my kind of the outline of other subject matter areas, taxation issues, revenue sharing issues. And again, these are all just informational sessions. We're we're wanting to give you all the information and answer questions and go get more information if you want us to, so that you all can make an informed decision moving forward. So we're going to just bring these certain topics in so that you can learn about them and then decide whether or not you all want to make a decision on those. Under CSKT policy implications, that's a portion of our outline. We actually have under their employment issues, housing, and drug testing. We also had on, regulatory issues, testing, enforcement, licensing, taxation, business sales issues. So there's a whole swath of things, like I said, that we're going to bring into you and really try and chip away at them so you all don't feel like you're constantly drinking through a fire hose. So.
Well, thank you guys. Thanks for putting that together, and I appreciate all your input.
Chairwoman Fine, there was one other document in that packet, and I gave that to you all. It's highlighted. It's called Title 45 Amended Laws via I-190. And that just shows you all where those criminal offenses that we talked about today, how they were amended, so that you can look at it and see this is how the actual amendment, the law was changed by I-190 for those criminal, those misdemeanor offenses. So I just highlighted them in there. For some reason, I accidentally highlighted one full paragraph, but I was intending to just highlight the section so that you guys all could just go and poke around and look at those if you want.
Okay, thank you. Does council need a quick break before our planning session? Okay, we'll take 5.
Okay. All right. I want to start all over. Okay, again, like I said, our main, we put in some time since on May 27th, when you guys came up with the list of different projects that you'd like to get completed with these funds that we just received. And so today we will take a look at it. Can we get to the, hopefully you guys can all see the list that we have attached. Get it to the main screen. Did I have to share that?
Yeah.
Is that the one there?
I have a question, and this is for Rick. So Rick, in regards to the employment data that we have provided to the Department of Treasury, have they come out with any formulation on how they're going to start or do distribution to the tribes?
Councilman Two Teeth, thanks for the question. They do have some information out in terms of how they are going to use that data. From what I understand, and a little bit off the cuff here because I don't have it in front of me, it will be essentially pro rata, similar to our enrollment. They're looking at number of employees within tribal organizations, and they have a portion of the 20 billion that was set aside to be split that way. They, being the Treasury, had changed their submission deadline for the initial amount, the portion that we've already received, and that in turn extended the employment portion to later this month. So we don't yet know how much that will be, but we had previously submitted that data. Katie will be going in to verify the accuracy of that when we get to go ahead to do it.
Okay, thank you, Rick.
So jumping back to our, we're trying to get this, hopefully you guys can all see the priority list on your screens now. Our main goal today is to get through this list and actually go through, and I separated and created a column for each one of you. So we'd like to go down there and just put the numbers in and then get the average and get going and find out what the priority is for the organization. We're having a little bit of problems here. Our screens are getting covered there. So, okay. So again, we can start out with whoever's ready, and all right, Lynn, way to step up.
Madam Chair, members of the council, I briefly went over this the other night when Zach presented this to us, and at least for starting out with the number one priority is the membership. And as many of you have probably already received inquiries from a lot of our members, I would like to prioritize that and get a stimulus payment out to the members.
Okay, you're number two. There's a couple ways we can do this. We can go through each one of them, or we can have all your guys' number one priorities and get them out there. Like I said, our main goal is to get this list out so we can have the direction and guidance that you'd like to go forward with.
Okay.
Once we get that, then we can get with individuals, and then we can start the process of them putting together plans to come so we can address all your goals.
Okay, I guess the way I envision this happening is we all, as a council, agree to what would be the number one priority, and then we'll just go down the line to see who's number two and, you know, and so forth. But if there's another method.
No, we're here to get the information from you, and then we'll put it together and we'll go from there. So if that's the way we'd like to go, if everybody would like to go and decide what their number one is, we can fill out the chart and then get the data in there for you.
Sure.
Does
Mike, do you want
anyone
to go
have
next?
questions on the priorities before we get there? Any clarifications? Any questions or clarifications on the priorities?
Well, it looked like number 6 was NA, right? So I put it as 20.
Yeah, number 6 is, and that's one of the things we want to make sure people understand, is that these ARP funds is not, we want to get your priority list up front and then get out to the people, out to the individuals that will put those together and let them know that the ARP funds are not the only funds, because like on that number 6, we already have funds to handle those that situation. So we want to get through and we want to get your priority in place. We want to talk to the people to get that information back to us, and then for them to be able to show us that these funds will be able to cover this portion. Maybe priority number 1 is covered with tribal health funds rather than these ARP funds.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Charmel.
Thank you. So Zach, if I just heard you correctly, you're saying that this priority list is what I think I heard you say is that it's not just going to be specific to the ARP funds, but the number 1 might be addressed with a different fund. Is that what you just said?
Correct. Again, we want to make sure with your guys' direction, the priority, and then we'll find out what funds will cover those priorities.
Okay, thank you. And I wanted to just point out the fact that, while the membership is the number 1 priority, there are so many things on this list that provide for the membership. And, an example is the priority, if the priority were inpatient treatment center, which is my number 1 priority on my list. I think, on the heels of the conversation we just had about decriminalization and expungement and all of the things needed, and what is the gateway? Is it, is trauma the gateway, and how do we look at some of the most critical needs of the people? I mean, it's hard for me to turn away from that as a priority as well. I think that there's a lot of things on this list that are so important. The retro pay for essential workers is huge. The housing essential needs and the repairs that members need is huge. There's a lot of things. So I'm not sure how all of council's thinking about it, but this is really difficult, to pull out just a number 1. But on my list, I really rate the treatment and the health and wellness of the people. I rate that very high. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mike.
I do agree with Charmel that this was a hard exercise because it's hard to take all these things that are listed. They all involve the membership. It's all service for the membership. And in looking at it, I did what you asked with the idea behind it being recovery from COVID. Not just necessarily my priorities for our membership, but rather priorities tied to recovering from COVID. And I can give you my whole list if you'd like that.
I don't know if that's the way you want to proceed or not, but I can go down. Your number 1 is my number 14, your number 2 is my number 15. I can do that if that's the way you'd like to do it.
You know, and again, that's kind of what we'd like to do. We'd like to be able to have everybody's priority.
Rick?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Because it seems maybe not everybody has all of the numbers listed, just in the interest of making this productive. Even though I do think there would be a high level of productivity and good results that would come out of going through everybody's list. I wonder if we could still just have council fill that out and send it back to Zach, but we could focus this on if council could maybe discuss, facilitated by Zach and Ruth and Katie, what are the things that you want to see now that we can prioritize putting together a plan or a program to bring back when we bring back the sort of fully ranked hierarchy of priorities. And that way we're talking about what do you want to do right now, and the things that are going to take a little bit longer to put into place. Just as a reminder, we do have 3 years for this funding. And so we don't have to act in some of the things that are listed. We don't have to act right now. And in fact, one of the things that we would like to do is to take council's priorities, go to the staff and ask them to prepare a plan with enough time to bring back to council, starting with the highest priorities. And to Zach's point earlier in one of the questions, I think it was from Charmel, this is good funding for 3 years that's very flexible. And so we're going to be looking for every opportunity we have to use remaining CARES Act funding, other non-tribal funds that could be used to satisfy the council priorities when we finalize those. That's what we mean by it. We're not just going to talk about divvying up the $39 million. The goal being, we want to go see how we can attack the priorities that council has, and then come back and say, of this 39 plus whatever we get in the second disbursement, we've only allocated X, whatever that amount is. And so we can have a better discussion about, okay, here's the amount we need from ARP funds to do the first, second, third priority. Now, how do you want to split up the remaining piece? And just as an example, if we can attack all of those other priorities with non-ARP funds, that then frees up more for economic stimulus type of payments to the individual members. But just as an example, the guidance does say use the federal stimulus payments amount as a guide for what those economic stimulus payments would be. So we're talking about $2,000. Probably $2,000 per year is the sort of threshold. If we did that for every tribal member, that would be $48 million. That's already more. If we did it each year, that's already more than we have in ARP funds, which is why we're trying to utilize as many other restricted funding sources as we can beforehand. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So I guess one of the difficulties I have with this is not knowing what that second amount is yet. in setting those priorities. And then the second one is, given that what you just mentioned, Rick, is we have 3 years, but also we have potentially an infrastructure bill coming down, which a lot of this would cover. And then also the water compact, which would cover, for example, the number 9 listed. So yeah, I mean, is it ARPA funds that we're prioritizing, or is it council priorities overall? So that's where I have difficulty with it. So how do you guys want to proceed? Do you want to go through your number 1s first, or just submit everything to Zach and have them work it out and then come back? Or what do you guys want to do? Did everybody do their homework?
But I do have 4 or 5 priorities, but I feel that's all the priorities I can muster right now is the amount of money we have. Because when the next pool of money comes out, then it might be a whole different story. I don't know, but I'm gonna at least.
So maybe we just go through our top 3 or 4 for now, just as for the discussion purposes. And then we'll submit our list to you and then come back.
Okay.
Does that work for everybody? Okay. Okay, let's go back to Len. What's your top 4?
Premium pay.
Thank you. Mike?
About my top 4 or 5 are all in the address negative economic impact. And so I want to see our people back working at a real decent wage. All of the people that want to work, I want to see them working. And so I have assistance to workers and families as my number 1, actually. And the small business support as number 2, hopefully producing more jobs. And let's see, 3 actually jumps. Where'd it go? I know I have a number 3 here somewhere. There it is. Addressing health disparity was my number 3. And then I'm back to the economic with number 4 with speed recovery to impacted industries, and number 5 comes back as the individual economic relief, the stimulus. So I'm really tied to that economic part.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mike. Charmel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear a few of them. I heard Mike very clearly. Thank you. My first 3, I kind of grouped, I would have made them all number 1s because I feel like they all serve the same purpose, and that's in that behavioral health services category. But so I split them up, being inpatient treatment as number 1, family drug court, wellness court number 2, and supportive housing number 3, because I feel like those will be a long-term help for entire families and our social welfare and for the people. So those were my top 1, 2, and 3, and then my 4 and 5 I felt could have been grouped together as well. I rated number 4 as the retro pay for essential workers because I feel like they were not taken care of in this last period of time appropriately. And then the number 5 being the individual economic relief payment for tribal members overall. Those two I felt go together. If I could have grouped all the first three as number one, then those next two would have been catch that, Zach.
You did sound like you were going underwater at times, but I think we got it.
Oh, great.
Thank you, Charmel.
Thank you.
Fred? Okay, Anita?
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's kind of a hard one to get through, and I have to admit I couldn't get it to print off, so I'm trying to play catch up here. But I think our mental health and providing activities that encourage and support community engagement, I feel like that is number one for me. I think to ask for economic development to identify and support any manner other than grants, COVID affected industries. Number three, and I'm not sure, I know a lot of these housing is going to have some dollars, like you said, there's other funding. The individual emergency home assistance, this is where I was looking at, like, we get requests all the time. And like the elder program, there isn't enough money in there to really address the home repair needs of people.
Yeah.
And I think if we had some kind of a grant out there that people could get a roof put on that was maybe $7,000 or $8,000, or put a new floor in that they're tripping on, you know, or they need some kind of bathroom remodel. It's stuff for homeowners that's outside of not just the elders program, but a lot of people are over income. They don't fit in with SCAHA. They don't fit in with the elder program because it's capped at 15. We can't get rural development in here to help us look at the 501s or the 504s. Just a program to help individual people, average individual people who, you know, could benefit from getting their places fixed up, or if they're elders. The economic stimulus would be nice, which would be the fourth one, but thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Go ahead,
I'm
Katie.
just gonna go off of what Anita said because I did just come from housing. I think, topping off what you said, at housing, a lot of the programs are 80% and below of the median income. And a lot of people are only like $40, $50, $100 above, and they are struggling. And with inflation prices going up, to get their roofs or anything else is really difficult to get done.
Okay, I do have to confess, I didn't do mine either until about 20 minutes ago. But my number one is youth engagement. So it kind of goes across number 12 and 13 on this chart. So I guess it's educational disparities, but also promoting healthy childhood environments. Because I just feel like our kids have lost so much these past 2 school years with trying to learn remotely. You know, we tried to give computers to tribal member kids. Still, not everybody learns the same. You know, there's different learning styles. So I feel like we have a whole area of catch up to do with our kids. So that's my number one priority. My number two is a family drug court wellness court focusing on restorative justice. You know, kind of like what Judge Abby and the former Judge Claudette focused on in their tribal justice documentary. That's my number two. My number three was the inpatient treatment center. And 4, it's kind of has to do with what Anita was talking about, the assistance with roofs, but also septic pumps, you know, so I think number 8 and 11 on this chart, to me, they're kind of together. It's people that may not qualify for those housing programs, or, you know, like most recently, we've had a lot of dire need situations where it's the homeowner's responsibility from their house to the city connection, and that's failed. And so, you know, people don't have money set aside to take care of those kinds of things. So those are mine.
Thank you.
Ellie, are you ready?
Sure. So most of mine were in the public health response category. My number 1 is the inpatient treatment center. Number 2 was mental health services. Number 3, supportive housing projects. Number 4, family drug wellness court. That's as far as I got.
Thank you, Ellie. Bing?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Most of mine was for helping the individuals with issues with their homes and whatnot. I had number 15, like Lynn, I had that for number 1. Number 11, I had for, you know, assist with the roofs and windows and flooring, plumbing, handicap accessibility and whatnot, because I know that there's a lot of these issues out there that need to be looked into and repaired. Number 19, I had, and the reason I had that is because I know some of the frontline employees that worked through the pandemic never got compensated for it. And I'd like to have that, them to go back and look into that for those people that didn't get any compensation, especially tribal health with some of their nurses and for medical and dental. And I'd like to go back and do that, especially, and then also some of the people that worked in for housekeeping and whatever else that they had to do when they're wiping down things all the time for individuals that came into these facilities, you know, health facilities that need to be taken care of all the time. At number 8 for my 4th one, and that was individuals for it was a home area for water pumps, septic tanks, and failure systems, and for water sampling. I know Elmo and Dixon and all them had a lot of problems with water, along with individuals with having roots and whatnot growing into their septic lines and plugging them up and whatnot. And also down the road here, I know that when we have these canals that are going to be lined with these pipe and whatever else they're going to use on them, there's going to be a lot of wells that dry up down in the valleys down there, especially in the RD area, because every year when that water goes down the river, a lot of them do go dry right at the present time. And then when this happens, I know that there's going to be a lot of them all along that river that's going to be going dry, and there's going to be a lot of problems, especially with our tribal members. We've got quite a few tribal members that live down there, so that's going to be an issue. And number 3 is supportive housing projects. You know, looking into that, maybe building a few more homes and stuff for our people. You know, like you go down to Missoula and just look at what they built. So many homes and you know, we have other bigger places where they can house a lot of people in them places. You know, it'd be something that we could do, you know, for different communities that need more homes for our people that are looking for places to live. So that's my 5 that I picked.
Thank you, Bing. Martin?
All right, 15, number 1, 14, number 2, 2, number 3, 3, number 4, and 11, number 5. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Carol?
Okay, mine is, number 1 is allocation of the ARP for economic relief to the membership. Number 2 is mental health. Number 3 is family drug court. Number 4 is investment to housing and water and sewer repairs. And number 5 is the gymnasium. To start with the gymnasiums in communities that don't have no place for children to go and meet and play and after school programs and that kind of thing. So the Elmo Gymnasium.
Thank you, Carol. Fred?
Okay, I guess my number 1 would be the individual economic relief. Number 2 would be assistance to workers and families. 3, inpatient treatment center. 4 would be mental health services, providing activities and encouragement, that one. And number 5, supportive housing projects.
Okay.
Okay. I sure appreciate your time this afternoon. We'll take this list and we'll start putting it together. You know, if you would like to, complete your list and email it back to me, we'll put that together and get you guys the list, and we'll come in for the next appointment with you. Okay. And again, I'm located right here in accounting. So if you have any issues or problems with it, just come in and we'll walk through it and get it all filled out for you, and we'll get it with everybody else's.
You, Zach. Go ahead, Martin.
And Zach, I do apologize for not responding to your email. I expect that, we expect our staff to be responsive and everything. And so I do apologize for not responding. So.
Thank you, Martin.
Rick?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Zach, I think it would be a good idea, just for convenience, to maybe see if we can get that printed out on 1 or 2 pages, and we can put them in all of the council's mailboxes as well.
Okay.
So whichever way you prefer, we'll make it happen.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I have a question. So what kind of time frame are we looking at here to move on with this priorities, identifying priorities? You're gonna come in next week?
Well, we can get on the schedule as soon as you guys want us back. If you give me that, first thing, we'll get the first 5 lists that you guys put together.
Okay.
We'll get that done here today. And then we'll get that out into, like Rick said, back to your guys' boxes, or I'll send an email out to you just showing you what you had your top 5, and then we can move forward from there.
Sounds good. Thanks,
Okay.
Zach.
So the ball's in our court to respond back.
Or stop by. Thanks.
Thank you, guys. Okay, this morning we had to reschedule council roles discussion to right now in place of the Bison Range update. So do we have Jordan on? There he is.
All right, am I on, Chairwoman?
Okay, make it exciting, Jordan. We've had a really long day.
Is this the last thing for the day?
We have one more thing after you, but it's a really short one, so.
All right, well, this shouldn't take more than 3 hours.
Okay.
So that's exciting. All right, I think Ryan was gonna join us and I see Rick there. So I'll go ahead and get started because I have I have an exciting slideshow to share with you guys. So if I can share my video, I know that I know Jen said I could. I don't see my little icon at the bottom though. Oh, share screen, okay. All right, you guys seeing that?
Yes.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's a few weeks ago, we had a discussion on the tribal council role in the reorganization. And so I was taking notes like a madman. And so I want to present to you guys what I heard and then kind of dig into the first part of that. So sit back, relax, and we'll just start into it. So what I heard from our last discussion, I put into two different buckets. The first was council operations and the second was staff operations. So for the council operations, what I heard was, what roles and responsibilities does council have? The do's and don'ts regarding tribal member issues, time expectations. Are you guys expected to work full-time or half-time? And then the council handbook was used as a guide is what I heard. And I'm wondering if that's sufficient for council needs or if that needs updating. So that's what I'm hoping to look into today. Other things I heard at that first discussion were council's big picture focus. That's something you guys would like to focus on. I know you guys are working on priority wish lists and codes and ordinances. And then another thing that you really wanted to focus on was council's communication with tribal members. And so perhaps an organizational telephone directory or a person to connect members or council with the appropriate person in the organization. For staff operations, I separated that out because my understanding is you have an executive team to perhaps take a look at some of these areas. And so if my understanding is wrong, please let me know and I can reconfigure, but that's my understanding. And so what I heard from council about staff operations is it would be helpful to have clarification around everyone's roles and responsibilities. There's a lack of responsiveness from some staff to tribal members. And so there was a discussion about where are things getting caught up and why. Perhaps staff needs extra support, need additional training, or needs clarification regarding the expectations of their position. Again, if council members thought it might be helpful to have a tracking mechanism to ensure tribal member issues are resolved. Again, there's perhaps a directory person to connect members to staff who are qualified to answer the questions asked. Want departments working together on cross-department issues and ensure member voices are heard and included. So again, that's sort of a breakdown that I did looking at my notes, and if that's incorrect, please let me know. So going back to the first slide, council operations. So I heard three different things. And so what I'm going to be looking at today is the roles and responsibilities does council have? And in doing so, I'm going to be looking at the council handbook. I sifted through that and pulled out what I thought spoke directly to council's roles and responsibilities. So after this discussion, hopefully we're all on the same page about what guidance there is out there for you already and what might be needed. I'm going to actually go into, oops, sorry. You guys are seeing full screen, right? I was trying to, okay, here's this. Okay. So the first thing I pulled out was the vision and mission statements. And this was adopted by the Tribal Council in May of 1996. So I'll just go ahead and read these. I thought these were pretty good. So the tribal vision statement is the traditional principles and values that served our people in the past are embedded in the many ways we serve and invest in our people and communities, in the way we have regained and restored our homelands and natural resources, in the ways we have built a self-sufficient society and economy, in the ways we govern our reservation and represent ourselves to the rest of the world, and in the ways we continue to preserve our right to determine our own destiny. The mission statement reads, our mission is to adopt traditional principles and values into all facets of tribal operations and services. We will invest in our people in a manner that ensures our ability to become a completely self-sufficient society and economy. and will provide sound environmental stewardship to preserve, perpetuate, protect, and enhance natural resources and ecosystems. And I have to say, I really like that mission statement. So as you guys are developing an organizational vision or continuing to keep these, I was reminded of a story that I really liked, and it was, they asked a janitor at NASA what he was doing, like what was his job involving? And the janitor answered, I'm building a rocket. And that's because the organizational vision at NASA was so strong that everyone within the organization believed that they were building a rocket. And it was true in a way, right? And so do we have such a strong organizational vision that if you asked anybody in our organization what we're doing, could they be able to answer that? And I'm not, not answering one or the other, but when you read these, it's really focused on keeping our traditional principles and values. And I like that. Okay, the next thing I took a look at, and if you guys want me to stop, just let me know, is the tribal constitution. And so this is sort of like the genesis of the tribal council's powers. And so within the constitution, it talks about the tribal council as the governing body of the Confederated Station Kootenai tribes with the Flathead Reservation shall be the tribal council. The tribal council so organized shall elect from within its own number a chairman and a vice chairman, and from within or without its own membership, a secretary, treasurer, sergeant at arms, and such other officers and committees as may be deemed necessary. So those are the officer positions in the tribal council. Jeez, I'm having a hard time here. If I minimize that, okay. So the tribal constitution also has a section called powers and duties. And generally I see three main categories: governance, land, and economy. And I had to minimize you guys, so I'm not looking at you. So if you need anything, just holler at me so I could see my whole screen. And so again, I see three main categories: governance, land, and economy. The governance examples in council's powers and duties within the tribal constitution, I just listed some examples here to give you guys a flavor of what they are. One is to protect the health, security, and general welfare of the Confederated tribes, to negotiate with federal, state, and local governments on behalf of the Confederated tribes, to promulgate and enforce ordinances subject to review by the Secretary of the Interior. And if you guys notice, I put in red every reference to the Secretary of the Interior because there's a lot of them. So I just wanted to note that for you. Which would provide for assessments or license fees upon non-members doing business within the reservation or obtaining special rights or privileges. So that one's kind of tied governance and economy together, and some just do that. To exclude from the restricted lands of the reservation persons not legally entitled to reside thereon under ordinances which may be subject to review by the Secretary of the Interior. To enact resolutions or ordinances not inconsistent with Article 2 of this Constitution governing adoptions and abandonment of membership. So enrollment's a big role of council as well in defining who can be a member, who can't be a member. To promulgate and enforce ordinances which shall be subject to review by the Secretary of the Interior again, governing the conduct of members of the Confederated tribes and providing for the maintenance of law and order and the administration of justice by the establishment of an Indian court and defining its powers and duties, and to regulate the domestic relations of members of the Confederated tribes. So there's more, but that just kind of gives you guys a taste of like some of the governance examples that are located within the tribal constitution. Land examples: to regulate the uses and disposition of tribal property, to protect and preserve the tribal property, wildlife, and natural resources of the Confederated tribes, to approve or veto any sale, disposition, lease, or encumbrance of tribal lands and tribal assets which may be authorized or executed by the Secretary of the Interior, to regulate the inheritance of real and personal property other than allotted lands within the Flathead Reservation subject to review by the Secretary of the Interior. And then the last sort of category is the economy examples. And so the examples I pulled out of there is to manage all economic affairs and enterprises of the Confederated tribes in accordance with the terms of a charter to be issued by the Secretary of the Interior, and a charter subordinate organizations for economic purposes, and to regulate the activities of all cooperative and other associations which may be organized under any charter issued by this Constitution. The bylaws get a bit more specific about council roles and duties. The Constitution, of course, puts out like the big picture and the specific duties. This is more of like the nuts and bolts. And so section 1, we talk about elections. Here it talks about the chairman of the council shall preside over all meetings of the council, perform all duties of the chairman, and exercise any authority detailed to him, and he shall be entitled to vote on all questions. I put in red some gender specific language just to highlight that. Section 2, the vice chairman shall assist the chairman when called on so to do. In the absence of the chairman shall preside, and when so presiding shall have all the privileges, duties, and responsibilities of the chairman. If we remember, I think there'll be in a few slides that there needs to be a resolution specifying the roles of every officer. And to my knowledge, the only specification of the officers are here outside of the chairman. The chairman actually has a position description. And so here's like the only reference I found to the vice chairman. I couldn't find anything for the secretary or the treasurer. So just keep that in mind for our discussion at the end of the presentation. Section 4, the duties of all appointed boards or officers, oh, here it is, shall be clearly defined by resolutions of the council at the time of their creation or appointment. So I'm not sure if that exists and I'm just not seeing it, or if we might want to take a look at that. Here it talks about regular meetings of the tribal council shall be held on the first Friday of January, April, July, and October at 9 a.m. And so those are talking about the quarterly meetings. I'm not sure how we set up the Tuesday, Thursday meetings. You guys can fill me in on that. Section 8 is special meetings may be called by written notice signed by the chairman or a majority of the tribal council. And so maybe it was created, the Tuesday, Thursday council meetings were created through that. Section 11, it shall be the duty of each member of the tribal council to make reports to the district from which he is elected concerning the proceedings of the tribal council. And section 12 is the tribal council may prescribe such salaries for officers or members of the council as it deems advisable from such funds as may be available. Ordinance 66A was, I thought, a really good resource for clarifying the role of the tribal council, since it's an ordinance clarifying the role of the tribal council. That was passed in 1978. So here it talks about the tribal council with appropriate input will identify the needs and options of the government and its people. The tribal council will select programs and determine strategy to meet identified needs. The tribal council will set overall government-wide goals and priorities. The tribal council with appropriate input will allocate resources according to overall priorities. And the tribal council will oversee the activities involved in obtaining the resources needed to carry out approved programs. Kind of switching hats, there's the corporate charter, and that's really to develop the economy of the CSKT. And so here it talks about some of the corporate powers of your guys' role on the CSKT corporation. So the members shall consist of all persons now or hereafter members of the tribe. So tribal members are the members of the corporation. And the tribal council, the CSKT, shall exercise all the corporate powers hereinafter enumerated. So some of these powers are to purchase, take by gift, bequest, or otherwise manage, operate, and dispose of property of every description, real and personal, subject to limitations, borrow money and provide loans to tribal members, to engage in any business that will further the economic well-being of the members of the tribe, or to undertake any activity of any nature whatsoever, to make and perform contracts in excess of $5,000 needs approval by the Secretary of the Interior. So probably talk about that as well. And pledge or assign chattels or future tribal income, to deposit corporate funds in any national or state bank if insured by the FDIC, to sue and be sued, to exercise such further incidental powers to conduct corporate business. You can petition the Secretary of the Interior to take out the Secretary of Interior clauses, but I believe there was like a voting referendum, or there has to be like a third of the tribal membership voting on that. So that might be challenging. Officers of the tribe shall maintain accurate and complete public accounts of the financial affairs of the tribe. And then the treasurer, this is actually the only other reference I saw where it gives a specific job to an officer. The treasurer of the tribe shall be the custodian of all monies which come under the jurisdiction of the control of the tribal council. We're coming to the end. Other documents of interest is resolution number 6-48, and that's the code of conduct. So that's pretty self-explanatory. I'm just got to be on board with everything. And then there is a tribal chair position description. So that's pretty thorough on what the chair's roles and obligations are, but that's the only one I've seen. So I'm gonna get you guys. So here's some like questions at the end, just to kind of lead discussion. I think this is gonna be a series of discussions. And so as far as your guys' roles and responsibilities of the tribal council, these are the documents I found that really laid out your guys' roles and responsibilities. So do you think these documents are effective, sufficient? Is there a need for modifications? Are these documents easily accessible? Are they clear? Do you see the need for additional clarification of council's roles and responsibilities? And is reorganization contemplated in these other documents, and does it need to be? And so I just wanted to kind of lay that out there for a platform for our discussion. And so now we can have more of a, what are you guys seeing? What do you guys want to see? Did that make sense? So I'll let you guys take it from there, but that's kind of what I prepared for today's discussion.
Fred?
Thanks, Jordan. Thank you guys for delving into this. It's got to be a little bit frustrating at times, I guess, to try to track all this stuff, but I guess I was, I keep going back, and it's probably a mistake to try to recap some of the history that I know, because I was involved with it for one. But you asked earlier, you don't know when the Tuesdays and Thursdays came into play. And I don't know if there's any documents that follow how things evolved. They just maybe evolved. When I first got back in like 95 or 80, well, I don't even know. Anyway, it was back in the day, 85 maybe. We had one meeting a week. It was on Tuesdays. And then periodically we'd have a meeting on a Thursday as needed. And then eventually in a couple of years or so went by, and then pretty soon we started having two. So that's kind of where the Tuesdays and Thursdays came into play. And then, I always called myself on again, off again, because, I'd be there for 4 years, I'd be off for a couple, back on. But then the most recent was the 8 years or 11 years I was off when I left as chair, and then I came back. I know it's been mentioned a couple of times that we're full-time. So is there any documents that track how we became full-time? Because at one time, when I worked for Wildland Recreation, I was paid part-time as an employee, and then part-time as counsel. And got all the benefits and everything associated with that. But I guess one of the questions is there any documents or anything that tracks where we're full-time employees, or how did Charmel put that the other day? Salaried or not salaried? What's it? What's the opposite of salaried? Anyway, so is there any documents that capture all that? Because like I said, there's a kind of 11-year span there that I don't know if it just evolved that way, or if there's anything that just identifies that.
Go ahead, Rick.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Councilman Matt. I think we should look to verify, but when I've gone down this path before, there's nothing specific that says council's part-time, full-time. I think what Jordan kind of walked through and what you had described as the timing also coincides with the beginning of the periods of growth that the tribe went through when we started to bring on, we first started to contract for programs, and then we started to compact for programs, and we had all the growth, and I think council's role kind of just evolved over that period of time. But as it relates to part-time, full-time, I do think that I want to maybe step back and separate that from the pay piece, because council's salary, or I can't remember exactly the language Jordan shared. I don't think it necessarily matters if there was a definition in the past. I think it's clear that council can set salary, and so I maybe I'm focusing too much on that, but I don't want to confuse the part-time, full-time piece with what the salary piece or implications would be, because I think the other thing we heard last time is that you're never really off, even if you're here 2 days a week. you're always on and available. And so by a definition, you're fuller than full-time. I think the question about what it means in terms of official commitments is one thing that we need to clarify here, because it will make a difference in how you spend your time. But the transition from quarterly only to quarterly only plus special to 1 day a week to 2 days a week to 5 days or 7 days a week, that from everything that I've been able to tell is there's minutes that sort of capture transitions, and you start to see more frequent minutes being recorded, but not a resolution or anything that says we've gone from part-time to full-time. Like I said, we do need to verify if that is the case, but I've gone through the records before trying to find something as it related to council salaries in the past, and haven't been able to find anything.
On that note, I just want to say that there was a time when council got paid for meetings only. And that was in the Dixon days. When my dad was on council, they got paid by the meeting. So somewhere there was a transition.
Yeah, and my point with that was just that council can set the salary and the terms around it, regardless of whether there's a definition or a defined part-time or full-time status, because your elected officials, not employees. And I think that distinction kind of makes is an important one. We can definitely provide some guidance on that, but I'm probably doing the exact opposite here as what I was hoping to prevent, and not conflating the two issues by bringing it up and focusing on it. But.
Okay, any other council input?
Well, I just think we're on the right path. As far as I'm concerned, I think we're going down the right path of going through this stuff, and it just seems like that it's much needed. The other one is the chairman's meetings. That's evolved too. It seemed like, again, as I returned this time, it seemed like that we were more delving into the business of the organization of the tribe rather than being the decision makers. That seemed kind of clear to me, if that's so. But I think what we're doing, we're heading down the right path. And then also there was committee meetings back in your dad's day. They got paid for committee meetings too. So that at that time period, there was a land committee, there was there was just all these committees, because it benefited them to have extra pay for all these committee meetings. So, but anyway.
Charmel and then Carol.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hope that this audio will come through because I'm traveling, but I think one important thing that I didn't hear listed, Jordan, is relevant to the, there's a mention, I believe, in the bylaws that for every important decision that the tribal council undertakes, every effort should be made to come to a consensus. And that's directly relative to our tribal customs and values. I was just talking with Johnny Arlee last week, and he was expressing his gratitude for the work that we do. And he said, when the chiefs would, when the chief would call together sub-chiefs and they would hear from the people and they would listen to the grave concerns or important matters, they would do everything they could to, he would hear over and over from the sub chiefs, and they would work through that dialogue until they could come to an agreement. And that's a part of our documents. And I know that, you know, I've mentioned that before. I really feel like we need to have more of that dialogue, that hopefully the 10 can come to consensus on important decisions a little more frequently. I believe that's our duty. Thanks.
Carol?
Yeah, I just remember there was some documentation regarding conflicts of interest and other types of documents that were adopted through resolution. And are those in here somewhere? Were they included?
I just skimmed over those, Councilwoman Langford. Those were, I'm gonna.
Yeah, I tried to go back, but some of it was told
Yeah.
we didn't have control. The other thing is that I believe the position is what you make it. You know, I've seen council members go 2 days a week and head home. And if you get a call at night, they'll say, don't call me. This is after hours. I feel it's a 24/7. That's how I have operated. And I don't have an office in the complex any longer because I feel like my work is out on the road. When I get a call and somebody needs to see me, I try to visit with them either by the phone, Zoom, or in person, or see what their issues are. But and there's other council members who take on responsibilities like Ellie and MMI. You know, those things need to be taken care of, and people don't think it's important. But you know, I noticed we're now getting back into NCAI. There was a time when the council stepped aside and said NCAI is not a good organization to really, because we do everything in-house here. We don't need an organization, but there's times we have letters that we need approved. But they've taken it upon themselves to get back involved, which I think is helpful. You know, and AT&I, and there's organizations like that we need to stay involved. Otherwise, like Shelley says, either we're there at the table or we're on the menu. And so we need to continually stay involved. And I think that's important. But to me, you know, the membership is always number one in every one of our minds, and that's who we take care of first. So anyway, I'm rambling. Thank you.
Okay. Jim wanted to offer some history.
How about now? I'm going to be aging myself, but Fred's older than me. But you know, back in the 80s, late 70s and early 80s, as you mentioned, we transitioned from Dixon Agency. Then we went up to Ronan, then we went up to here, moved up to here. But my experience at the beginning as a council member was we only got paid for those meetings in which we attend, and we were paid $75 a day, less mileage. There was no set date or day of the week. And so somewhere along the line, Tuesday was set, and then they decided Tuesdays and Fridays would be a good mix. What the debate really was we had council members that were newly elected that were serving in two roles. They were managers, they were department. I was a defender. I was a member of the defense department. I was also an associate judge appointee. And that was the biggest conflict I ever had in my life. At the time, I decided to resign from them too. Well, my term ran out as a judge, and I resigned from the advocate position. What that created a problem, because what I stated when I left that position was that I do not have a response. I should not be serving in two positions. I should be either a elected council member and not an employee. Well, I had 4 people fighting against me because they were employees. So I made the suggestion that, okay, people in similar positions such as in the elected officials such as in Congress, they're paid a salary flat out. And for the very reason that Carol mentioned, they are paid a salary because you are 24/7 while you're still elected in those positions. And I made I thought, a reasonable argument to have that completed. But in the 80s, I was dealing with people that, and there was nothing wrong with it, that were paid a salary. If you don't work an hour, you don't get paid an hour. They didn't understand the salary concept. So I, I almost starved to death because they stopped scheduling meetings. Really did. I mean, they stopped scheduling meetings so that I could not get paid. Somewhere along the line, and I was just tickled to see it, because after I got out of that role, I went back to the Bureau and completed my career. I was watching things progress, and you guys are now in that role. You're flat out salary. You're not a formal employee of the tribe, and you're serving your responsibilities as council members to the membership. You're getting those calls at midnight. You're getting them in the morning, and I mean, it's just great. And what these guys are doing here, we tried to implement that in the 80s, 82, 83, 84. Let somebody come in and organize this the way it's supposed to be, like a corporate entity. That met with resistance because of the lack of knowledge. People didn't understand what I was trying to say. But I stepped back, and I'm just really pleased to see what's happening here today. And this is the most I'm ever going to say as a sergeant at arms, because I know my role. And you know that I don't like to interfere or make statements unless I'm invited. But that's some of the history. And then Fred is right. I mean, it just evolved. And I think it's ideal that the council today, all of you, are starting to accept that change rather than resist it. Tickles the heck out of me, I'll tell you that. So I'll sit over here and shut up, and I'll go get some donuts. Bye.
Thank you, Jim. Jordan, you want to get us back on track?
Yeah, so I'm going to take us back to the first slide because that's the way I'm seeing things, but I want you guys to steer me in the right direction here. So again, for council operations, what I heard from the first meeting is what roles and responsibilities council have. And so in going through the tribal council handbook, I pulled out everything I thought was relevant and just kind of shared that with you. I glazed over it to not take all day. We could really dive into the whole Constitution, at length if you all want. But I just wanted to kind of give an overview today. And so I think I compare it to like swimming. You have to learn how to float before you learn how to swim. And so I understand you guys want to look at really big picture things, but I want to make sure we're doing a nice float with our existing documents before we start looking at that stuff. And so kind of coming back to our questions here, do you think these documents are effective, sufficient? Do you think they need modifications? And if we can just start answering these questions, maybe they're all great and we can just go on ahead. But if you think they need fixing, I think that would be a great next step, is to look at how we could improve these documents. And so if we could spend some time on these questions, I think that would be great for my understanding, unless you guys want to go a different direction.
So when we did our strategic planning, starting back in January of 2020, we did go over the Constitution, the bylaws, the code of conduct, and that's kind of where we dropped off with the pandemic. So I think this is great to resume this conversation. I think this council has had some code of conduct issues. And then most recently, I think we need clarification on, do our roles stop when we're in an election year? And I'm hoping that the election committee or board can address that in their meeting today, because there's been several comments about that most recently. So input from anybody else?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think you were referring to me when you said our duties stop. I never thought that our duties stopped. I thought that within the election rules that using a tribal asset for, that could possibly look like it's an advantage or a benefit to us in our election. And so I do believe that the election committee does need to clarify that, but that was the position I took. It's not that anybody else has to take that position. That's just my position.
I do think it is one that needs clarification. Did you see Charmel's comment in the chat? She'd like to see a procedural guide to enhance the interpretation of the documents.
Madam Chair, if I could give an example, and I did prepare the outline I shared with all of you a week or so ago, but one of the things that I'm referring to is, what does it mean to work at the pleasure of the tribal council? Some of our positions say that, and ordinances say that about certain positions. And how does that mean the tribal council interacts with those positions? Is it strictly through the chair, or is the chair's responsibility to be the voice of the tribal council, meaning the whole council then is involved? I think we could use some of that clarification and understanding, and if it could be more of a consistent guide, because I'm not sure if each chairperson might handle that just slightly differently. I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you, Charmel.
So, Madam Chair, I got that note down. We can talk through that on the staff level and maybe touch base with Councilwoman Gillen and see if we can start working on something like that. But just in terms of the way Jordan's framed these questions, maybe I could put a little bit of a spin on it. In terms of, I've got the text box open here, so I'm having trouble seeing but rather than focus on, are these documents effective? I think one of the things that sort of struck me as we were going through this presentation is that, obviously the basic requirements are being met by the council as a whole and all of you individually. We don't have any issues with that. We don't have a constitutional crisis going on or anything like that. And you're obviously having quarterly meetings every quarter, like it says in the Constitution. You've got 10 council members, that sort of thing. But as Councilman Matt said, there's a lot of things that have evolved and developed over time. And Rick kind of pointed out that the history of the records seems to show that they sort of took massive steps in evolution every time there was some major new initiative or step that was being taken by the council going forward. But I think as I sat here and listened to Jordan talk about the mission statement and then the Constitution and the powers and duties, it all sort of really tracks to a lot of the planning discussions we've had about the betterment of the people, taking care of the land, having a healthy economy, which is a product of both the people and the land coming together. And so it seems like without even having gone through these recently, that's still at the forefront of your mind. And are these effective? Well, clearly they're effective from my perspective because you're meeting all of the obligations. But I think one of the issues that's presented here now is there a desire to formalize some of the things that have evolved into sort of normal practices, or is it better to continue on as we've been going so that you've got the flexibility to adapt as you move forward because things may change? I think one of the things that really strikes me is you've got some documents that you can't change on your own as a council. You'd have to go back to the membership, like the Constitution. Ordinance and resolutions are much different than that. That's something that you've got, like the Code of Ethics resolution. That's just a resolution that you could easily change it next Tuesday if you wanted to. So from that perspective, are there, I think we sort of are starting to build a list, and Jordan's got a few of these, but are there other issues and things that you think are somehow absent from a guidance perspective? Do you feel like there's a void in guidance on any particular issues out there right now?
Carol?
I think until somebody can sit down and put all of this together for us, it's really hard to answer that question because it's all over the place. I have to go here to there. I mean, and that's okay, but some things could be easily found if it was put together for us, like our big, huge Bible that has everything in it, which that to me is workable. But a way to code it so we can find things that we need. And usually it's easier for me to call Rhonda or you or ask Rick about a question then, and you guys are busy and you don't have time to be answering my questions every day of the week. So yeah, if there's a way to put that in some kind of a book or a file for us on the computer. I know Charmel has done a pretty good job at trying to compile those things in Teams, those kind of things. So I try to utilize that and try to put things that I think are useful in there for me. So that's helpful too. But everybody has to be able to use, know how to use that system in order to access it.
Thank you, Carol. Bing?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ryan, maybe I ask you this question. Since you've been working with the council for these last 8-9 years since you came on board, what do you think?
Has it been that long?
What do you think about that? Yeah. Because, you came on brand new when we come over here, when we were working on a compact. And with all the meetings that we had to go through and everything, there was a lot to be discussed. And the changes that we're talking about here, I don't know if it's, to me, it's, I don't think I'd really go for that because there's issues that do come up that we need to attend to, and we need to know about them right away, like the compact, and as I say, I would just like to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, well, first of all, I was never elected by people to make any decisions, so this is just my opinion. But I think one of the things I was really impressed with is how efficient the government operates and how efficient your council meetings are run here. And in a large part, I think that's due to the decision that was made way back when to move away from the committee system and have regular 2-day-a-week kind of meetings. And that whole evolution of that process, I think, plays a big part in that because committee meeting kind of formats just cause defensiveness and one side of the story and then the next day the other side of the story and that whole thing. I think one of the challenges that we just find throughout, and I think it's ubiquitous among governments all over the world, is that when you're dealing with the types of issues and decisions that you're dealing with, it's hard to stay engaged for 8 hours a day on this kind of stuff. I mean, a meeting like this, we could force ourselves to lock ourselves in this room and talk through this stuff until there was consensus and everybody agreed. And this is a perfect set of documents that govern everything we do. And really, we could nail it. But a lot of us would fall asleep. A lot of us would get cranky and hangry, and and I think that's the biggest thing I think that we see as your staff is how do we effectively use your time? Because if we're not, we can all get up here and start to see the look in everybody's eyes that we've talked too long, but we still have stuff we need you to decide on. So we need you to pay attention, even though we're boring. And I think that's just the reality. And, it doesn't always translate because not everybody does this for a living. But anybody who's sat in your chairs, I think, knows it, that there's a capacity. And so how do we try to work within that capacity? And so that's, I think, from my perspective, my personal philosophy is, write down 2 words and not 100 if you can, because that gives you the greatest amount of flexibility. And we're humans, we got to be ready for a hailstorm or a fire or anything in between, right? My profession teaches otherwise sometimes, but I feel like, especially going through this presentation, I feel like you've got a good foundation of the documents. I think as you move forward, there's things that need to be caught, and then I think you bring up the point, good point, Councilwoman Langford, about just having a more user-friendly reference guide, so you can go back and access it, and it's something you can do quickly and become familiarized with it. I think the idea, like you said, Chairwoman, about having this kind of a thing going on at the beginning of each council, or maybe periodically, so it's kind of a review and brought up, I think that would make a lot of sense for folks, especially if it's accompanied by something that's useful. But I think that at the end of the day, you know, we've got however many, what are we on, ordinance 119 or something? There's, you know, we're at the point now where some of those are very old and you're in the process of working through them. Some of them just need to have old terms and things updated, like Councilwoman Gillen mentioned, you know, positions that serve at the pleasure of the council or that sort of thing. Just revisiting, what does that phrase mean? What do we want it to mean as we move into the next phase in governance? So that process is ongoing. I think this exercise is really to kind of shake down, if you will, kind of what all the expectations are out there, because I think one of the things that Councilwoman Langford said is, you know, I think the position is what you make it. Well, I think that's probably what you all think. You all have an idea of what your role as council members is, and that's the way you carry it out. And maybe you want to do better, maybe you think you're doing great. That's your decision to make. And I think the question is, as a whole, is there some disconnect between the views you have of what the council should be doing, the council's roles and responsibilities, and what your peers have, and do we have a forum in this council chambers where you can discuss that? And if the forum isn't one that's conducive to allowing those discussions, then I think that's where we need to dig in and figure out whether there's a problem there. And I know, you know, I see it as an outside observer. Sometimes you know, there's kind of a little, but you work through it, right? Like I said, we're not in a constitutional crisis here. This isn't nobody's holding a gun to your head for this discussion. This is something you've decided to do on your own. So I think it's okay to approach it from that perspective of, are there issues that maybe we just haven't articulated yet that we really need to make sure we're having a good forum to discuss them, because there's a better way to have that dialogue. I think that's kind of the question that I kind of feel like maybe we could all wrestle with for a little while after kind of going through all of this stuff, is because it's hard to put your finger on what that is, if I'm making any sense right now. That, you know, sometimes there's a issue going on and it's bugging me, but I don't know how to express it, and that's just starting to bother the person next to me, and it prohibits work getting done that everybody wants to see get done. So sorry, I don't mean to. You put a quarter in me though, so it's fault.
So I just want to add to what you're saying about the capacity. I like the new format in that we have some action items and then ordinances and committees. I really like that format. Today was an especially challenging day to, you know, reaching that capacity and being able to sustain it. So, you know, the breaks that we take, you know, before, it's like, can we take a 15-minute break, because 5 is not enough. You know, my brain, when we first started the marijuana discussion, it took me a while to be able to focus, you know, because I work through lunch too, so I didn't really have a break. So there's that capacity thing, and I like, you know, formatting in longer breaks just so I can recharge. I like Carol's suggestion about that comprehensive guide being in one place and accessible. And to that end, I really think our website could use improvement. When I need to go there and look for an ordinance, I don't know the number. And I have to scroll through 119 ordinances to figure out, because they're not there by title. Or last time I checked, they weren't. And so that's really, really frustrating to me. And then I do think we could do a better job of orientation with new council, not just program orientation or department orientations, but just that constitution, bylaws, code of ethics, all that thing. And then my last thing is, I think this council has done pretty good with being able to discuss the issues. And, you know, we have had times when we've debated issues, but I think we still need to work on just respecting the diverse opinions of one another. There's a way we can do that and not totally agree. You know, maybe it's that consensus building that, you know, our elders talk about, but just respecting one another for our diverse opinions, because we weren't all raised the same or, you know, don't have the same values and whatever. So I think just respecting that of one another and then, you know, trying to reach that consensus. So, Fred?
Oh, no. That's an interesting thing. I'm sorry if I'm interrupting anybody, but that's, I mean, we struggle with that too as staff, right? Like, was I just too much of a jerk when I told Rick what I really thought of his idea? Like, but I don't say anything because, and then, so, I mean, it's in the human nature. So, that is, I think that's a good, we don't need to spend a bunch of time talking about that, I guess is the reason why I bring it up. But that's something we could maybe do some research on. I mean, I'm sure there's social scientists that have studied this a little bit more that, you know, weren't trained as lawyers, but, and we'll see if we can find some stuff and for reading on that and come back with that next time. I'm starting to get a pretty good list here though. I just want to kind of recap where some of the ideas that we've heard. A procedural or a comprehensive guide to all of the documents along with some interpretation documents or outline, I think. We have some of that already started with what Jordan's put together, and of course, Councilwoman Gillen has her stuff. The website is certainly on our list as a staff. We're talking about that, and things like finding ordinances. That all makes sense. I think we're starting to get on the capacity, and I would like to. I don't know if you've done the check in on this yet or not, but I would like to get some feedback from the council as a whole as to how you feel after now of a couple of weeks of how we've had it organized, where you haven't? Okay, so we can talk about that maybe at the end, but how you feel about the format, because yeah, I mean, we thought about that when when the marijuana discussion, or one of them got moved because of a cancellation or whatever, did that sort of hijack it? And, but also just like in terms of thinking through how, like the meeting you've just had went. Like we did a little bit of that over the lunch hour, talking about how, you know, there was at least one issue, and this is in no way meant to, you know, be disrespectful to any of the presenters today. Everybody did a fantastic job, and everybody was working in the best interests of everyone here. But there was certainly a couple of issues that I felt like if we'd have had an opportunity to vet a little bit more, we could have saved some time in here, because there was a good discussion, but you didn't really have a decision you needed to make. And so was that a good use of your time to be discussing a problem that there's not a solution that's ready for you to make a decision on yet? So I also was kind of hoping maybe we could pivot a little bit into that kind of discussion as well. Because as we're trying to just kind of adapt on the fly with like helping you with agenda setting and that kind of thing. So thoughts on anything like that?
Go ahead, Fred.
Well, I'm glad you bring that up, because that's exactly, I think, one of the areas that I think that it would be beneficial for you to do exactly what you're saying without it coming in here. You know, it could be vetted a little more before it gets here. But the other thing that Shelley brought up, you know, that's one of the things that I think we need to rely a little bit more on IT and Rob for the website, you know, and getting that stuff to where it's accessible, not only for us, but you know, I just think that would be really helpful too. I know it's an evolution process, but I think it would really help to think about it.
And I think our new on-base system on at least the council agenda part of it is going to help kind of vet some of those things, like the couple issues we had this morning. So I think that it's a work in progress, but I think we'll get there. Sure. Carol.
Yeah, I think one thing that I would like to see is when a department comes in, they need to vet it through their their supervisor and make sure that the due diligence is done, because I think sometimes we get in here like this budget thing that happened today, when we realized, well, it was more of a budget request and we ended up taking action. It's like, I wasn't ready to do that yet because I don't know where this money's going to come from. But then after the discussion last night in the district meeting, I thought, well, there are areas that this can come from and we can tweak the budgets here and there. So I would like to have it vetted, and I would like to have options and not come in here and spin our wheels because I think it's a waste of time because we have so many things we're dealing with. And I think that's why the overload today too, is because we had to just really drill down, but really it should have been drilled down before it got to here.
Rick?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And really, I think at the heart of this discussion is answering the question of collectively how and when do you want to engage? Because if you go look at the base requirements, as Ryan said, everything's met. So then it's just a matter of how appropriate is it for council to engage in a discussion before there's options? Is that appropriate? Do people want to, do you just want to see the smorgasbord? Are there certain issues where you want to be involved in the discussion along the way? And I think that's a little bit of what happened this morning is because that is unclear in the standard practice is like employees generally expect to engage council early. And I think a good example of that is the bison range updates. And there's not a decision for council to be making all of the time, but there's a very frequent, in truth, probably very in the weeds, in many cases, opportunity for input. And I think clarifying that, if it's possible, is going to be really ultimately the thing that clarifies council's role. Even if it's, we want to be engaged at all times to provide input. I mean, I think the lack of clarity means I may be not providing the level of detail that you want to hear when you want to hear it. And I don't want that to be the case if that's not the will of council. And more importantly, I want to make sure that the next version of me, the next version of council has consistency so that one of our stated directives from council with the reorganization is let's be consistent in how we operate the government. And I think that, and it's interesting because I saw heads shaking and nodding. Sometimes the same head doing both as we've gone through this discussion. And so, yeah, I guess I would request patience a little bit because it's a hard thing to bring forth a procedure document when we really don't want it to be our procedures prescribed to council without understanding kind of where you want to go as a whole.
Anita?
So real quickly, I think it's going to take not only us, but the public a little while to absorb the new change. When you talk about when people come on council, they, I guess, kind of pattern or you do what other past councils have done. And at that time, council entertained and took care of the problems. And that was the day that I made the remark that, you know, regardless of what, I was going to listen to the people because they're the ones who appoint you. And I had just always assumed that my job was to represent them if they're not feeling like they're getting heard. And in this case this morning, regardless of what, they had already been ticketed. you know, their only alternative is to come to the council. So it kind of got spun forward and got brought in, but definitely it's still going to have to come back to the council for certain things. But I think it's just going to take people a while to absorb, and even the council themselves. But I feel bad if people are being ignored or they're waiting for a phone call, and you go places and they say, well, I've called them and it's been 2 months and I've had nothing back. I mean, I think that's where sometimes as representatives, we have to step forward and ask why. So thank you.
And I guess I really appreciate the website comment option for people, because I think it's some of the things that we've been hearing are less mean or toxic than other mediums. And I think in the past, I've seen people just live and die by social media, and that's not the real world. That's not most of our, well, maybe it is our reality, you know. It's like, if you disengage from that, like on the weekend, so you go to the mountains, you don't have service, and you're not on Facebook or whatever else, you have a clear mind. And rather than just saying, oh, well, people are saying this or people are saying that, you know, I mean, I think we all need to be kinder to one another and just engage face to face or one-on-one or whatever. I just hate to see us be swayed by some of those kinds of things. Jordan, is any of this useful to you?
Oh, yeah. I think I see Ryan taking some good notes there. And so I think we'll all touch base and make sure it's going to be helpful to you. But I liked what I think we have a good baseline of documents. I'm just hoping that makes sense for what you guys are hoping to accomplish in the future. And so it sounds like there's some adjustments we can make, some tweaks we can make that will be more useful for you guys. But it doesn't sound like right now there's a thirst for a brand new sort of document. I hope I'm hearing that right. And so maybe we can just refine and then move on to how you guys want to tackle the next set of challenges. Does that
Martin?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Jordan, Ryan, and Rick. Kind of on the point of technology, I feel like we can't ignore social media either, though, because a lot of our membership, that is our outlet, that is reaching out to us. And so, yes, if, you know, I'm not going to ignore it because it's offensive or bad or anything. That's just the world we live in. That is the new world we live in. I should put it that way. Social media is not going anywhere. If anything, it's going to get more expansive. And so I don't feel like throwing a blanket over social media because sometimes someone gets offended by something that was said. You know, the other thing that we got to remember here is we have to know where we're at. Like, we are elected officials, and it's not all going to be fun. And, you know, there are going to be negative things. There are going to be people that disagree with us. There are going to be groups of people that disagree with us. Yeah, that comes with the territory. I think that's one thing that I think people don't realize when they get into this, is that this is a very volatile position. And I think too, you know, to that point, I don't think that we all should always agree on everything. I think that dissension and discussion is good. You know, if someone has an opinion that I'm ignorant of, and they can present the facts in a way that I can understand and that makes sense, then I probably could change that. Or if someone is just hell bent because I offended them and it pissed them off and they come at me, then that's probably on me. And yes, we got to be respectful of each other, but being respectful doesn't mean you have to be silent. And the other thing too is that, you know, people need to understand that, like, there is going to be disagreements. You know, Carol and I sit here and we've had our fair share of disagreements, but at the end of the day, we work together, and at a certain point, those disagreements make us stronger because, you know, I don't want people that always agree together to make the decisions. That's one of the things that the membership criticize us for, is that we all look like we're just everything's unanimous. And they don't understand that because we get the packets and we look at the things, that's the main reason why there's a unanimous decision. But if there's dissension amongst that at times, then so be it. And don't take those things personally as council either. I mean, that's the other thing, like, we can't take things personally. I mean, if someone blows you up on Facebook or something, you know, let it roll off, or you're in the wrong profession. I mean, being a politician is not, you know, it's not what they make it out to be on TV, that's for sure. So, thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I wasn't saying let's throw a blanket over social media. That isn't what I meant at all. I just meant that shouldn't be such a, I guess, influence. I started the comment by saying, yeah, let's use technology. Let's use that email, because that's, I think it's more thoughtful than, you know, people just going off on Facebook or whatever and being mean. That was, I guess, my main point. Anyone else?
I disagree with you, Martin.
I'm glad you do.
Well, I perfectly understood what Shelley was saying, because I end up probably spending too much time looking on Facebook, but some people do get seems like that's their only life. But anyway, just appreciate both sides of that discussion. I agree with both of you.
Ellie?
I guess the other piece to social media that we need to be cognizant of is a lot of damage can be done. You get one rumor floating out there, and if we can put it to rest with the truth right out of the gate, you save all of the other people who jump on that bandwagon, and then it gets out of control. So I think having somebody monitor somehow, or at least try to correct things, or maybe that's going to be addressed with the way we're trying to be more, communicate better with our membership. Maybe those things will start to improve on their own through those efforts, but there could be ways to nip things in the bud before they get wildly out of control.
And I think having these particular discussions in open session and live streaming them should help a lot of that no, we're not, you know, pocketing money or whatever the accusations are out there. Go ahead, Martin.
And I guess to Ellie's point, I think that we could help as a group, you know, to put a lot of those rumors to rest. Like, it's amazing how quickly, like, a thread will stop when, like, a council person jumps on there and is like, no, that's really not what's happening. This is what's happening. And I've done that. And that's all they're asking for. You know, a lot of these threads get going because there's a question asked, and then people jump on there and throw all these fake things out there. And then it just takes a life of its own. You know, if you can get on there and as an elected representative, say, no, that's not what's going on. Or no, we haven't made a decision. You know, even just answering a question. Is there a payout? We haven't made a decision yet. Why not? Because X, Y, Z. that stops them from running to their friends and their groups. And so it's like, it feels like we're afraid to engage on some of these platforms. And everyone's got keyboard muscles, but they're not going to say those same things to your face, but it's also words are words. And just again, we're here to do a job. And one thing the other thing that I would hope that Ryan, this comes across very clearly, is that we need information. We need as much information as we can get about things. We don't always necessarily need to know decisions or be in those decisions, but if decisions are made at a high level, say at an executive level, I can't find out about that in a department head meeting. I need to find out about that when that decision is made, because that's where things start getting going. That's where rumors start, when things start just kind of, oh, this was done, blah, blah, blah. And then you got council who have no idea that these decisions are made, and that looks fishy. It looks like we're hiding something, because how are you as a council member not knowing this? Well, I don't know. I don't know where we didn't, where the disconnect was. So information is critical, and these silos, literally, we're all in silos now. And that's how it feels. It feels like we're not getting information as council. Me even being an officer, I don't feel like I'm getting information. And it's crazy that me as a council member feels like that some days. Thank you.
Rick?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't want to kill productive discussion, but that's actually a really good transition to what I was hoping to have in after council meeting discussion with council. I wanted to take an opportunity to get your feedback on how things are going, to basically hear those things that there's clearly some frustration about, that we're not doing well, and provide that opportunity. So if I'm not too presumptuous in suggesting that, I think that would be a good thing. And then we have one action item that's somewhat related to that I can bring up when we're ready for it.
Lynn?
Just a quick comment, and I'm glad you brought that up, Rick, because I just wanted to acknowledge how well this is working. Because recently, many of the requests that I've been getting from the membership, I'm able to either text you or email you, and I get a very prompt response now, and I really appreciate that. And a few of the members also acknowledge that too. So that's working very well. I like that, and I just wanted to let you know.
Cal?
Yeah, one thing that I had heartburn is hiring of an individual and not being aware of it until I guess 3 or 4 weeks later. It's like, what, really? And so, and I know I've had discussions with others on that. And so I think it's important, like Martin said, that we are made aware of things, because that makes it very difficult. It makes me feel stupid. It's like, okay, was I gone, or was my brain for that day just not working, or how did I miss that? And so I think, but I'm willing to have patience with things right now, because I see it as a positive. I'm excited that this council will be out of the day-to-day operations, and will be able to do the things that we really need to do as elected leaders. And so I think I'm excited. I've been here a while, and I've seen the way things work, things don't work in a way, you guys think council fights. There was times when it was almost a drag out outside with some of these guys. And I was the only woman in here, but anyway, it has gotten interesting, but I think we do very well here. I think we've had differences, but I'm okay with that because at the end of the day, I still am for the same goal as everybody else is in here. Needs to work for our people. Thank you.
Anyone else?
There's-
Go ahead, Ryan.
I'll just recap real quick. So I think we've got some really good things on our to-do list, and we will hit the reference documents, the interpretation of that. We'll take a look at the capacity. We'll continue working on that. The website is obviously on our list. And the flow of information, particularly from staff to council, and making sure you guys are informed. I've got that, a big star beside that, Councilman Charlo. So we'll get moving on that. Just to circle back to the documents, though, I think I didn't really draw this out, but Jordan certainly had highlighted a number of issues, and they were sort of peppered in throughout. But I'm assuming that you want us to kind of go through and do a flush everything out, and all of those little things that need to be tweaked. You want us to come back with you on recommendations on how to tweak them, and then put them in kind of a user-friendly guide, bring them all up to date, that sort of thing, similar to the process that you guys have done with some of the other ordinances, but maybe not quite as painful, just sort of a here's the red line, these are all the antiquated things, or whatever. Okay. We'll head that direction then. Thank you all for, hopefully this wasn't as excruciating as it could have been.
Can I?
Are you ready to be done?
Go ahead, Jordan.
Well, great. I'm on Zoom over here, but I thought I felt the energy lift a little bit up in the room. So that was fun for me, at least a little bit. For the next conversation, do you want a recap of what Ryan just mentioned? And then I was thinking to kind of walk through some of how council would like to approach the big picture items. Does that make sense to you all? Or do you want to just focus on probably doing the cleanup and then finishing all that before we move to the next step? It might make sense to kind of look at those things because maybe some of the discussions would kind of be included in the cleanup Ryan's talking about, like maybe the officer positions have special duties for big picture things. I don't know, but it might make sense to kind of talk about that as we're doing cleanup. Does that make sense to y'all, or am I off base?
Thoughts from council?
Yep.
Okay, I'm seeing some thumbs up.
All right, well, good deal. Thank you, everybody, and I hope you have wonderful afternoons and good weekends.
Thank you, Jordan.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I could very quickly before adjourning, and then if any council wants to stay and discuss how it's going, or if you have to leave, that's okay. Apart from the election committee, we really need you to stay here. So one of the things that we recently discovered needs a more formal, i.e. council action to accomplish, and it probably ties directly into the conversation, but there's a need for a mutual termination of the attorney contract between Ryan and CSKT. We had originally thought that needed only council chair approval because it's not entering into a new contract. And so I am here to ask council if they would be willing to approve, and I'm going to pull it up here in a second, approve this very short document that just acknowledges a mutual termination of Ryan's employment contract as an attorney.
Okay, motion by Fred, Second by Ellie. Questions? All those in favor? Motion carries unanimous.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and that's all I had. I think in the interest of openness, I would prefer to have my evaluation after adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, motion to adjourn by Fred. Go ahead, Fred.